The cold came for Lyra first through her fingertips. Even with worn leather gloves protecting her hands as she knelt in the snow gathering the last of the winter yarrow, the bite of early frost sent familiar pain shooting through her joints. This far north in the borderlands, winter arrived without apology or warning, seizing the land in a merciless grip that separated survivors from the doomed. Lyra belonged to the former category through stubborn will alone. "Too stubborn to die," her mother had once said, smoothing Lyra's hair with herb-stained fingers. "That's what will save you when everything else fails." 23 winters into her existence, Lyra had proven her mother right in ways neither could have anticipated. The settlement tolerated her continued existence only because her hands could coax healing from plants when all else failed. It was the single valuable trait in a being otherwise deemed worthless by wolf society. Lyra gathered the last stems into her basket and rose slowly, scanning the vast emptiness of the northern plains. Snow was coming again tonight. She could smell it in the air, sense it in the low-hanging clouds that pressed against the distant mountains like gray wool. The animals knew it too. The forest had gone silent hours ago, creatures seeking shelter before the storm's arrival. Only Lyra remained, harvesting what she needed before nature buried everything under its frozen blanket. Her cabin stood alone on the eastern edge of the borderlands, a structure built from the ruins of an abandoned watchtower with her own hands. Small but sturdy, it had survived 3 winters already. Just like its builder, it refused to collapse despite all odds. As she approached, memories washed over her unbidden. She was 10 years old again, sitting by the hearth fire while her mother sorted roots and leaves into careful piles. "Listen carefully, little one," her mother's voice echoed across time. "What I teach you now, the pack would forbid if they knew, but there are secrets about our kind that the strong don't want the weak to know." Young Lyra had leaned forward, eyes wide. "What secrets, Mother?" "The ancient code." Her mother's voice had dropped to a whisper. "Written when wolves and humans first separated their paths, before alphas claimed power, before omegas were branded as lesser." Her fingers had traced mysterious symbols in the air. "It speaks of those like you, child, omegas who cannot shift." "Broken ones," Lyra had whispered, repeating what she'd heard others say. Her mother's eyes had flashed with rare anger. "Not broken, different, dangerous to those who rule." She'd cupped Lyra's small face between calloused palms. "They fear what you might become if you ever learned the truth." The memory dissolved as Lyra reached her door, the weight of her basket pulling her back to present reality. Her mother had died the following spring, taking whatever secrets she'd planned to share to her grave. Lyra's father had remarried within a season, producing 3 perfect daughters who could shift their forms with ease, who looked at their half-sister like she was a stain upon their bloodline. Inside her cabin, Lyra methodically hung the yarrow to dry from the rafters, where dozens of other herbs dangled in various stages of preservation. She moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for isolation as the first snowflakes began drifting past her small windows. She had reinforced the roof with salvaged tin 3 times already, stuffed moss and clay into wall cracks, and traded an entire summer's worth of preserved medicine for enough firewood to last through deep winter. The other omegas in the settlement called her paranoid. They didn't understand that comfort was a luxury Lyra couldn't afford, not when you stood at the bottom of a hierarchy that measured worth by the strength of your inner wolf. Lyra had no wolf. Not inside, not to transform into when the moon called, not during her first heat at 16, not during the initiation trials at 18, not during any of the forced awakening ceremonies her father had subjected her to before finally giving up and stopping claiming her as his daughter. Human-locked, wolf-blind, a genetic dead end in a species that valued bloodline above all else. She built up her fire as darkness fell, reciting her inventory aloud to combat the growing silence. Yarrow for bleeding, willow bark for pain and fever, comfrey for bone setting, pine resin for wounds that fester. The familiar litany brought comfort as wind began to howl around her small haven, the predicted storm arriving with gathering force. Few in the territories knew the truth about what her mother had once whispered. Lyra had spent years searching for fragments of knowledge, collecting scraps of forbidden history. She knew now that the ancient code wasn't merely legend. It existed, hidden away in the private libraries of alpha kings and queens across the 5 territories, kept from common knowledge because it contained uncomfortable truths about their perfect hierarchy. The most dangerous secret, the one alphas had spent generations suppressing, was that omegas who couldn't shift weren't mistakes of nature. They were its correction. Where ordinary wolves drew strength from physical transformation, these rare omegas possessed something far more threatening to those in power: the ability to heal not just bodies, but souls, to reach into the spiritual essence of the pack and mend what had been broken. Soul healers, they had once been called, before the Great Purge, before the rewriting of history. Lyra had never manifested such abilities, but she sometimes dreamed of them, waking with fingertips tingling as though they had touched something beyond flesh. These were dangerous thoughts, thoughts that would see her executed in certain territories if spoken aloud. So she kept them buried deep, focusing instead on the practical healing her mother had taught her. The storm announced its full arrival with a shriek of wind that rattled her shutters. Lyra secured them tighter, listening to the blizzard's fury building outside. This one would be worse than usual. She could feel it in her bones, that peculiar instinct she'd developed for predicting nature's worst moods. She settled by her fire with a worn book of medicinal properties, one of the few possessions she'd taken when leaving her father's house. Hours passed as the storm transformed from concerning to terrifying, the wind's howl becoming a constant scream that threatened to tear her small home from its foundations. Even the worst storm she'd weathered hadn't matched this intensity. Something struck her door with enough force to be heard over the gale. Lyra froze, book forgotten in her lap. No traveler would be out in such conditions. No wolf would approach an omega's solitary dwelling during a blizzard unless desperate or dangerous. Neither option boded well for her survival. The sound came again, not the random battering of storm-blown debris, but deliberate, scratching. Then something that cut through the howling wind like a blade. A whimper, low, pained, desperate. Every survival instinct Lyra had cultivated over 23 years screamed at her to ignore it. Wolves didn't travel alone in blizzards. Wolves didn't seek help from human-locked omegas. And wolves who came to your door during a storm were either rabid, dying, or hunting. None of those options ended well for her. The whimpering continued, growing fainter. Despite everything, despite knowing better, despite years of learning that her compassion was a weakness she couldn't afford, Lyra found herself moving toward the door. Her hands trembled as she lifted the heavy wooden bar. The wind nearly tore the door from her grip the moment she cracked it open. Snow blasted into her face with stinging force. She could barely see 3 feet ahead through the white chaos. Then the wolf collapsed across her threshold. He was massive, easily twice the size of any wolf she'd ever seen, with fur the color of storm clouds and blood matting his left shoulder. His breathing came in ragged gasps, and when his eyes met hers, she saw the glazed look of someone slipping toward unconsciousness, toward death. "No," she breathed, already reaching for him, already forgetting every lesson about self-preservation. "You don't get to die on my doorstep." She grabbed his scruff. He was too heavy to lift, too far gone to help himself. She pulled with everything she had. He slid forward 6 inches, then another 6. Finally, mercifully, his hindquarters cleared the threshold, and she slammed the door shut, throwing the bar back into place with shaking hands. The sudden silence was deafening. She collapsed against the door, gasping, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The wolf lay motionless on her floor, bleeding onto the rough wooden plank she'd salvaged last spring. He was dying, obviously dying, and she had just trapped herself inside a small shelter with a predator who outweighed her by at least 100 pounds. "Brilliant, Lyra," she muttered, pushing herself to her feet. "Absolutely brilliant survival strategy." But she was already moving toward her healing supplies, already assessing his wounds with the clinical detachment her mother had taught her. Deep gash on the shoulder, claws, not teeth. Blood loss significant, but not immediately fatal. Breathing labored, but steady. Body temperature dropping rapidly, she could work with this. The next hour passed in a blur of motion, heating water, cleaning the wound, stitching torn flesh with careful, practiced movements while the wolf remained mercifully unconscious. She packed the wound with a poultice of yarrow and comfrey, wrapped it in clean cloth strips, and covered his body with every blanket she could spare. She built up the fire until her shelter was almost uncomfortably warm, then collapsed into her chair to wait. That's when she heard the second scratching at her door. Her blood went cold. Then a third scratch, a fourth, a chorus of whimpers and desperate sounds that made her stomach drop. There weren't just one wolf at her door. There were many. She stood slowly, her legs trembling, and approached the door with her heart in her throat. This was it. This was how she died. Killed by a pack of dying wolves in a blizzard in a shelter she'd built with her own hands because she'd been stupid enough to show mercy. She lifted the bar, she opened the door, and she saw them, 25 wolves, maybe more, all collapsed in various states of distress in the snow outside her shelter, some barely moving, others clearly having tried to reach her door when their strength gave out. The blizzard still raged around them, burying them slowly in white. They were freezing to death. All of them. She should have closed the door, should have saved herself, should have accepted that she couldn't help them all, that trying would only kill her faster. Instead, she looked at those dying wolves and made the most foolish decision of her entire life. "All right," she said quietly. "Come on then." She propped the door open with a log and started dragging wolves inside. One by one, she hauled them across her threshold, some unconscious, some just barely aware enough to help with weakening legs. She pulled until her muscles screamed, until her hands bled, until the shelter that had felt spacious for one person became a cramped maze of fur and bodies and labored breathing. 25 wolves. 25 massive, powerful predators packed into a space meant for a single Omega. By the time she dragged the last one inside and barred the door against the storm, dawn was only hours away. Her shelter had become a den of dying wolves, and she had become their only hope of survival. She fed the fire until it roared. She moved between them with water and what healing supplies she had left, treating the worst wounds first, trying to warm bodies that had been too long in the cold. Some were injured, claw marks, bite wounds, signs of a battle they'd fled or lost. Others were simply lost, caught in the blizzard far from shelter. None of them tried to hurt her, None growled or snapped or showed any sign of aggression. They just lay there, watching her with eyes that held something she couldn't quite name, something that looked almost like recognition. By the time the blizzard finally broke and pale dawn light crept through her shutters, Lyra was half dead herself. Exhausted, running on nothing but determination and stubborn refusal to let these wolves die after she'd worked so hard to save them. She'd done it. Against all logic, against all sense of self-preservation, she'd sheltered 25 freezing wolves through the worst blizzard she'd seen in 5 years. And as she finally collapsed into her chair, too tired to even close her eyes, she allowed herself one small moment of satisfaction. She'd saved them. She had no idea she'd just saved the Alpha King's entire inner pack. She had no idea that when she opened her door that morning, she would find 300 wolves standing outside in perfect military formation, all staring at her shelter with an intensity that made the air feel electric. She had no idea that the silvery male standing at the front, the one who would look at her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve, was about to turn her entire world inside out. But she was about to learn. Lyra woke to silence. Not the howling fury of the blizzard, not the labored breathing of 25 dying wolves. Just silence. Deep, crystalline, unnatural silence that made her skin prickle with instinctive unease. Her fire had burned down to embers. Pale morning light filtered through the gaps in her shutters, painting thin silver lines across the floor. And the wolves, all 25 of them, were watching her. Not sleeping, not dying, watching. She sat up slowly, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. Her hands were raw and blistered. Her shoulders felt like someone had beaten them with a club. Exhaustion sat heavy in her bones. But she was alive, and somehow So were they. The massive storm-gray wolf she'd pulled inside first was on his feet, still favoring his injured shoulder, but standing. His eyes tracked her movement with an intelligence that sent a chill down her spine. The others were in various states of recovery, but all were conscious, all watching. "Well," she said, her voice rough from hours of shouting over the storm, "good morning to you too." None of them moved. They just stared with an intensity that felt like being examined under glass. She'd treated injured wolves before, strays mostly, or young ones who'd gotten separated from their packs. But they'd never looked at her like this, like they were waiting for something, like she was supposed to understand something she didn't. She pushed herself to her feet, wincing as her knees protested. "The storm's over. You should probably—" The knock on her door cut her off mid-sentence. Not scratching, not whimpering, a knock. Deliberate, measured, unmistakably human-like in its intention. Every wolf in her shelter went rigid. Lyra's heart started hammering against her ribs. Nobody knocked on her door. Nobody visited her shelter. The other Omegas avoided her, and the higher-ranked wolves pretended she didn't exist. She'd built this place specifically to be forgotten, to be overlooked, to be safe through obscurity. The knock came again. Patient, inevitable. She looked at the 25 wolves packed into her small space, all alert now, all focused on that door with an intensity that bordered on reverence or fear. She couldn't tell which. "Stay," she whispered, though she had no idea if they'd listen. Then she crossed to the door, lifted the bar with shaking hands, and pulled it open. The world outside had transformed overnight. The blizzard had buried everything under 3 feet of pristine snow that glittered in the morning sun like scattered diamonds. The sky was that particular shade of blue that only comes after a storm, clear and sharp and impossibly bright. And standing in front of her shelter, arranged in perfect military formation, were more wolves than she'd ever seen in one place. Hundreds of them, maybe 300, all massive, all powerful, all standing in absolute silence. And at the front, having just knocked on her door with a very human hand, stood a man who made every survival instinct she possessed scream at her to run. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with shoulders that spoke of violence and victory in equal measure. His hair was black as a raven's wing, pulled back from a face that could have been carved from granite. But it was his eyes that froze her in place, silver, not gray, not pale blue, silver, like moonlight on water, like the edge of a blade, like something not quite human looking out from behind a human face. He wore the black leather and silver insignia of the Northern Pack, the ruling pack, the pack led by— "You're the Alpha King," she breathed, and it came out like an accusation, like a curse. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I am." His voice was deep, carrying authority that made you want to obey before you understood the command. "And you are the Omega who sheltered my inner pack through the blizzard." Her mind went blank. His inner pack, the 25 wolves currently occupying every square inch of her shelter, were his inner pack, his most trusted warriors, his personal guard. The wolves, who were supposed to be the most dangerous in all 5 territories. She dragged them inside, stitched their wounds, covered them with her blankets. She was so dead. "I didn't know," she said quickly, taking an involuntary step back. They were dying. You saved them." He said it simply, like he was stating a fact about the weather. Then he did something that made her blood run cold. He dropped to one knee in the snow. Behind him, 300 wolves lowered their heads in perfect unison. The storm-gray wolf she'd pulled inside first limped out of her shelter and positioned himself at the Alpha King's right hand. And Lyra realized with a jolt that this wasn't just any inner pack member. This was his second, his most trusted commander. "You saved my second's life," the Alpha King said, still on one knee, still looking at her with those unsettling silver eyes. "You saved 24 of my finest warriors. You opened your home to dying wolves in a blizzard when you had every reason to let them perish. You are owed a debt that cannot be repaid with mere gratitude." "Get up," she said, panic making her voice sharp. "Please, just get up. You don't owe me anything. I was just—" "What is your name, Omega?" The question cut through her babbling like a knife. She swallowed hard. "Lyra. Lyra." He said it like he was tasting it, learning its shape. "I am Alaric, Alpha King of the Northern Pack, Lord of the 5 Territories, Keeper of the Blood Oaths." He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, suddenly towering over her again, close enough that she could smell pine and snow and something wild on his skin. "And you, Lyra, have placed me in an impossible position." Her stomach dropped. "I don't understand." "The blood debt." He gestured to his second, to the wolves behind him. "By law of the old ways, when one saves the life of a pack member, that pack owes a debt. When one saves the life of an inner pack wolf, that debt extends to the entire pack." He paused, and something flickered in his silver eyes, something almost like amusement. "When one saves the life of 25 inner pack wolves, including the second, the debt becomes unsustainable." "I don't want anything," she said desperately. "I don't want payment or acknowledgement or anything. Just forget it happened. Please, forget." "Forget?" He repeated the word like it was foreign. "You want me to forget that an Omega, a human-locked Omega living alone on the borderlands, risked her life to save my inner pack? That she worked through the night to heal them? That she gave them her blankets, her fire, her shelter?" He leaned closer, and she couldn't look away from those silver eyes. "Tell me, Lyra, do you know what we do to Omegas who catch my attention? The rumors, the disappearances, the stories whispered around fires about Omegas who were never seen again." "I've heard stories," she whispered. "What have you heard? That they disappear? That I—" His voice was soft, dangerous. "Take them, hurt them, kill them." She nodded, barely breathing. He studied her for a long moment, expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he threw back his head and laughed. It was a sound like thunder, rich and genuine, and completely unexpected. "Oh, little healer," he said when he finally stopped, something almost fond in his voice. "You're afraid I'm going to kidnap you, aren't you?" He shook his head. "No." He said it firmly, definitively. Then his expression shifted, becoming serious again. "But I am going to offer you a choice, and you're not going to like either option." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "What choice?" "Option 1. You accept a permanent place in my pack. You come to the Northern Keep as my personal healer, with status and protection and resources beyond anything you've known. You'll want for nothing, and no one will ever dare harm you or question your worth again." It sounded like a dream, like everything she'd ever been denied, wrapped in a pretty package and offered by the most powerful alpha in 5 territories, which meant it was a trap. "And option 2? She asked. His smile was sharp as broken glass. "Option 2, I leave 300 wolves outside your door in perpetual debt service until you accept option 1. They'll hunt for you, protect you, follow you everywhere. They'll make it impossible for you to continue living the quiet, invisible life you've built here." He paused. "So really, little healer, it's not much of a choice at all." "That's not fair," she said, hating how her voice shook. "No," he agreed. "It's not. But I'm not asking you to be fair. I'm asking you to be smart." He gestured to the wolves around them. "These wolves owe you their lives by pack law. That debt must be honored. You can accept it gracefully and gain everything, or you can refuse and lose the only thing you seem to value, your solitude." She looked at the hundreds of wolves surrounding her shelter, all watching her with that unsettling intensity. She looked at her small, safe space, the home she'd built with her own hands, the life she'd carved out of nothing. She looked at the Alpha King, whose silver eyes seemed to see straight through every defense she'd ever constructed. And she realized he was right. There was no choice. There never had been. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "if I accept your offer, what exactly would you expect from me?" Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, that she was negotiating instead of simply refusing. You would serve as healer to my inner pack. You would live in the keep with status equal to my advisors. You would have autonomy over your work and your life, with one exception. What exception? He stepped closer, and she fought the urge to retreat. You would be under my personal protection, which means you go nowhere without an escort. You speak to no one outside the pack without my knowledge, and you never, ever put yourself in danger the way you did last night. His voice dropped lower. I don't lose the wolves I claim, Lyra. Not to storm, not to battle, not to their own foolish compassion. If you become mine, you stay mine. Understood? Become his. The word sent a shiver through her that wasn't entirely fear. And if I refuse? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Then I hope you enjoy company, little healer, because 300 wolves are about to become your permanent shadows. She looked at her shelter one last time, at the life she'd built, at the safety she'd created, at the obscurity that had kept her alive this long. Then she looked at the Alpha King, who was offering her everything she'd never dared want, and asking for her freedom in return. She thought about the storm gray wolf, his second, who she'd stitched back together without knowing who he was. She thought about the 24 other wolves who'd trusted her with their lives. She thought about how she'd spent her entire existence being told she was worthless, broken, disposable. And she thought about how for one night she'd been necessary, essential, enough. I need 3 days, she said, to settle my affairs, to say goodbye to... She gestured vaguely at the borderlands. To what? She had no friends here, no family who would mourn her leaving. But she needed time, time to process, time to prepare, time to convince herself she wasn't making the worst mistake of her life. Alaric studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. 3 days. My second will remain here with 24 guards to ensure your safety. I don't need guards. I've survived alone for years. 300 wolves or 25, he said mildly. Your choice, little healer. She gritted her teeth. 25. Excellent. He turned to his second, who immediately stepped forward. Gareth will see to your needs. He looked back at her, his silver eyes absolutely unreadable. And Lyra. Yes? Thank you for saving them. For being brave enough to open your door when you had every reason to keep it closed. Then, before she could respond, he shifted. It happened so fast she couldn't track it. One moment there was a man, the next there was the largest wolf she'd ever seen, black as midnight, with those same silver eyes staring out from a predator's face. He was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. He turned and ran, and the massive pack followed him, a river of fur and power flowing through the snow, heading north toward the keep, leaving her standing in her doorway with 25 wolves and no idea what she'd just agreed to. Gareth, the storm gray wolf who she now knew was the second in command, shifted back into his human form. He was younger than Alaric, maybe mid-20s, with gray eyes and a wicked scar across his left cheekbone that matched the wound she'd stitched last night. Well, he said, grinning at her with far too much amusement. This is going to be interesting. She looked at her suddenly very crowded shelter, at the wolves who showed no sign of leaving, at the path the Alpha King had taken north. I've made a terrible mistake, she said. Gareth's grin widened. Oh, absolutely. But don't worry, little healer. We'll make sure you survive it. Somehow, that wasn't as comforting as he seemed to think it was. The first thing Gareth did after Alaric left was reorganize Lyra's entire shelter. You can't possibly think all 25 of you are staying inside, she protested, as he directed wolves to form a perimeter around her small home. There's barely enough room for 5, let alone... We're not staying inside, Gareth said, his gray eyes gleaming with barely suppressed amusement. We're staying close. There's a difference. He gestured to the wolves already positioning themselves in a wide circle around her shelter. You get your space. We get to fulfill our duty. Everyone wins. This is absurd. This is pack law. And he turned to face her fully, and despite his easy grin, there was steel underneath. You saved our lives, Lyra. Every single one of us would be frozen corpses, if not for you. Do you really think we're going to let you out of our sight after that?" She wanted to argue, wanted to point out that she'd lived alone for years without needing protection, that she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. But the words died in her throat when she saw how the other wolves were looking at her, not with pity or contempt like she was used to, but with something that looked almost like reverence. It made her skin crawl. "Fine," she muttered, "but stay outside. I need—" She gestured helplessly. "I need space to think." Gareth's expression softened slightly. 3 days, little healer. Then everything changes. Use them wisely." He shifted and joined the others in their perimeter, leaving her alone in her shelter with her racing thoughts and the growing certainty that she'd just traded one kind of cage for another. The first day, she tried to maintain her normal routine. She checked her stores, the herbs she'd dried over summer, the preserved foods she'd bartered for, the medical supplies she'd carefully hoarded. She inventoried everything with meticulous care, making lists of what she'd need to bring, what she could leave behind, what would survive the journey north to the keep. The wolves watched her through the windows, not threateningly, not intrusively. They just watched, like she was something precious that might disappear if they looked away. It was unnerving. By mid-afternoon, she couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her gathering basket and pushed open the door. "I need to collect some plants before the snow buries them completely. I'm going to the eastern ridge." Gareth, in human form again, fell into step beside her immediately. "I'll accompany you." "I don't need—" "Humor me," he said, and there was something in his voice that made it clear this wasn't a request. They walked in silence through the snow-covered forest, Lyra searching for the winter-hardy plants she needed, Gareth following a few steps behind, like a well-trained shadow. After an hour of this awkward dance, she finally snapped. "Why are you really here?" she demanded, spinning to face him. "And don't say it's about pack law or debt. The Alpha King could have just thanked me and left. Instead, he's essentially conscripting me into his pack and leaving his entire inner guard to babysit me. Why?" Gareth studied her for a long moment, his scarred face thoughtful. "You really don't understand what you did, do you? I pulled some wolves out of a storm. It's not—" "You pulled the Alpha King's inner pack out of a storm," he interrupted. "Do you know what we were doing in the borderlands during a blizzard, Lyra? Do you know why we were there?" She shook her head. "We were hunting traitors." His voice went hard. 3 packs in the southern territories have been organizing a rebellion. They want to overthrow Alaric, fracture the alliance, return to the old ways where might makes right, and Omegas like you are property, not people. He took a step closer. "We'd tracked them to a compound near the border. The battle went badly. We were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and when the blizzard hit, we were separated from the main force. We should have died." Her mouth went dry. "But you didn't." "No, we didn't. Because a human-locked Omega took one look at dying wolves and decided they were worth saving." He smiled, but there was something fierce in it. "Do you know what that makes you, little healer? It makes you dangerous. It makes you valuable. It makes you exactly the kind of person Alaric needs in his pack. Someone who acts on compassion instead of politics. Someone who sees worth in broken things. I'm not—" "You are, though." He said it gently. "You're broken in the same way he is. You just don't know it yet." The words sent a chill through her. "What do you mean?" But Gareth just shook his head. "That's not my story to tell. Come on, we should head back before it gets dark." They walked back to her shelter in silence, but his words echoed in her head long after the sun set. "You're broken in the same way he is." What did that mean? The Alpha King was powerful, feared, respected. She was none of those things. They had nothing in common except he'd knelt in the snow for her, offered her status and protection when he could have just taken what he wanted by force, looked at her with those silver eyes like she was something more than the worthless Omega everyone else saw. She didn't sleep that night. The second day, the other Omegas came. Lyra was outside checking on the wolves' makeshift camp when she saw them approaching, 5 females from the settlement, including her half-sister. They walked with the careful neutrality of people approaching a volatile situation, and they stopped a respectful distance from Gareth's perimeter. "Lyra!" her half-sister called, her perfect face arranged in an expression of concern that didn't reach her eyes. "We heard about what happened with the Alpha King. We wanted to make sure you were all right." "No, you didn't," Lyra thought. "You want to know what favor I've gained, what advantage I might have, what this means for your own position in the settlement's fragile hierarchy." But she walked over anyway, because some habits were too ingrained to break. "I'm fine. Thank you for your concern." "Is it true?" asked a younger Omega, her eyes wide with something between fear and fascination. "Is the Alpha King really taking you to the Northern Keep?" "He's offered me a position as pack healer," Lyra said carefully. "A position?" Her half-sister's lip curled. "How generous of him! And what did you have to promise in return, sister?" The contempt in her voice was familiar, expected, but it still stung. "Nothing," Lyra said. "I saved his inner pack during the blizzard. This is how he's chosen to honor that debt." "By dragging you away from your home? How romantic!" Her half-sister stepped closer, and Lyra saw the real emotion underneath her polished exterior. Jealousy. Raw and bitter. "You've always been strange, Lyra. Always choosing herbs and healing over finding a proper mate. Always living out here like an exile when you could have tried to integrate. And now, somehow, you've caught the attention of the most powerful alpha in 5 territories." She laughed, and it was a cruel sound. "We all know why you really saved those wolves. You're desperate. Desperate for validation, for purpose, for someone to finally see worth in a broken Omega who can't even shift. So you risked everything on a gamble, and somehow, impossibly, it paid off. But don't think for one moment that changes what you are." The words hit like physical blows, each one precisely aimed at the wounds Lyra carried. And the worst part was that she wasn't entirely wrong. Lyra had been desperate. She had wanted to matter, to be necessary, to prove that her existence meant something. "That's enough." Gareth's voice cut through the clearing like a blade. He'd moved between them without Lyra noticing, his body language pure threat. "You will speak to the future pack healer with respect, or you will leave. Now." Her half-sister paled. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." Gareth looked at each of the Omegas in turn, and whatever they saw in his expression made them all take a step back. "Let me make something very clear. Lyra is under the Alpha King's personal protection. Any insult to her is an insult to him. Any harm to her will be answered with the full force of the Northern Pack. And any Omega who thinks she's somehow less because she can't shift," his smile was all teeth, "should remember that she accomplished more in one night than any of you have in your entire lives." The Omegas fled, all except her half-sister, who stood there for one more moment, her expression twisted with something Lyra couldn't quite name. Then she turned and walked away, her spine rigid with barely suppressed fury. Lyra stood there in the snow, shaking. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes," Gareth said. "I did." He looked down at her, his expression surprisingly gentle. "You're pack now, Lyra, or you will be in 2 days, and pack protects its own." "I'm not pack yet. Aren't you?" He gestured to the wolves surrounding her shelter. 25 of the most dangerous warriors in the 5 territories, all of them watching her with that same intense focus. "They chose you the moment you opened your door, little healer. Everything else is just formality." She wanted to argue, wanted to point out that she hadn't chosen them, that she'd never asked for this, that she still wasn't sure she wanted any of it. But the words wouldn't come because some small, broken part of her, the part that had spent 23 years being told she was worthless, was desperately, dangerously grateful that someone had finally chosen her, even if she didn't fully understand why. The 3rd day, Alaric returned. He came alone this time, walking through the forest with the kind of confident grace that suggested he'd never needed a pack for protection. He was in human form, dressed in the same black leather and silver insignia, and his silver eyes found her immediately where she sat outside her shelter, doing a final inventory of her supplies. "Walk with me," he said. Not a question, not quite a command. Something in between. She stood and followed him into the trees, very aware of Gareth and the others watching them go but making no move to follow. This, apparently, was a conversation meant to be private. They walked for several minutes in silence before Alaric finally spoke. "You've been crying." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "My half-sister came to visit yesterday. She reminded me of some truths I'd been trying to forget." "What truths?" "That I'm broken, that I'm desperate, that the only reason you're interested in me is because I happened to be convenient when your pack needed help." She kept her eyes on the snow-covered ground. "That I'm fooling myself if I think this is anything more than obligation on your part." Alaric stopped walking. "Look at me, Lyra." She didn't want to, but something in his voice made it impossible to refuse. She raised her eyes to meet his, and the intensity in them stole her breath. "I'm going to tell you something," he said quietly, "and I need you to hear it, really hear it. Can you do that?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "You are not broken. You are inconvenient to a society that measures worth by the ability to shift, that defines value by power, but that society is wrong." He took a step closer. "I have commanded packs for 15 years. I have led battles, negotiated treaties, executed traitors, and built an alliance that spans 5 territories. I have seen strength in 1,000 different forms. And what you did 3 nights ago, opening your door to dying wolves when you had every reason to fear us, to let us die, to protect yourself first, that took more courage than any battle I've ever fought." "You don't understand," she whispered. "I'm not brave. I'm just broken." His smile was sharp. "Good. So am I." She stared at him. "What?" "My father was a tyrant," he said, and his voice went flat with old pain. "He ruled through fear, through violence, through the systematic brutalization of anyone he perceived as weak. Omegas were property in his pack, disposable, less than nothing." He paused. "When I took power 15 years ago, I swore I would build something different. A pack where strength came from loyalty, not terror. Where Omegas had autonomy and protection. Where being born without a shift didn't mean being born worthless." Her chest tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to understand why I can't let you go." He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You represent everything I've been trying to build. An Omega who saved lives, not because she was ordered to, not because she hoped for reward, but because she couldn't do anything else, because her compassion was stronger than her survival instinct." He reached out and tilted her chin up, forcing her to hold his gaze. "You are not convenient, Lyra. You are essential. And if you join my pack, it won't be out of obligation. It will be because I have spent 15 years looking for someone exactly like you, and I am not fool enough to let you slip away now that I've found you." The words hit her like a tidal wave. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he was saying. "I don't understand," she managed. "You will." He released her chin but didn't step back. 3 days ago, you opened your door to dying wolves. Tomorrow, I'm asking you to walk through mine. Not as payment of a debt, not as an obligation, but as a choice. My pack needs a healer who sees value in broken things, and He paused, and something flickered in his silver eyes. "I need someone who isn't afraid of monsters." "I am afraid," she whispered. "I'm terrified." "Good." His smile was almost gentle. "Fear means you're smart enough to understand the stakes. But the question isn't whether you're afraid, little healer. It's whether you're brave enough to come anyway." They stood there in the snow-covered forest, the Alpha King and the broken Omega, and she felt the weight of the choice settling over her like a physical thing. Tomorrow she could stay here in her small, safe shelter, in her quiet, invisible life, alone. Or she could walk through his door into the unknown, into danger and possibility, and a future she couldn't begin to predict. "I need you to promise me something," she said finally. "Name it." "If I come with you, if I join your pack, you have to promise me autonomy, real autonomy, not just pretty words about protection and status. I need to know that I'm making this choice for myself, not because you're giving me no other option." Alaric studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You will have autonomy over your work, your quarters, and your life within the keep. You will answer to no one but me, and I will never command you to do anything that violates your conscience or your calling as a healer." He paused. "But I will not compromise on your safety. Escorts, guards, protection, those are non-negotiable." It was more than she'd expected, more than she'd dared hope for. "All right," she said. "All right. I'll come with you." "Just like that?" "Just like that." She met his silver eyes and felt something shift in her chest, something that felt almost like hope. "You said you need someone who isn't afraid of monsters. Maybe I need someone who isn't afraid of broken things." Alaric's smile could have lit the entire forest. "Then we have an accord, little healer." He turned and walked back toward her shelter, and she followed, her heart pounding with equal parts terror and anticipation. "Tomorrow at dawn, your new life begins. I hope I'm strong enough for it." "You are." He said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. "You're stronger than you know." But as she watched him shift back into wolf form and disappear into the forest, she couldn't help wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or taken the first step toward becoming something more than she'd ever thought possible. Whichever it was, tomorrow she would find out. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she would learn whether the Alpha King truly valued broken things, or if she was just another piece in a game she didn't fully understand. One thing was certain. When she opened that door during the blizzard, she'd set in motion events she couldn't control, events that reached far beyond her small shelter and simple life, events that had somehow connected her fate to that of the most powerful wolf in 5 territories. And beneath all her fear and uncertainty, a small, fierce part of her whispered that perhaps, at last, she'd found somewhere she truly belonged. Dawn came too quickly. Lyra stood in her shelter, the home she'd built with her own hands, the sanctuary she'd created from nothing, and tried to memorize every detail. The way morning light filtered through the eastern window, the scent of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, the rough texture of the wooden walls she'd chinked with moss and clay during her first desperate winter alone. This place had saved her life, and now she was leaving it behind. "Ready?" Gareth appeared in the doorway, his gray eyes gentle with understanding. Behind him, she could see the other wolves already forming up for the journey, their breath misting in the cold morning air. "No," she said honestly, "but I don't think I ever will be." He smiled. "That's the spirit, little healer. Come on, Alaric's waiting." She picked up her pack, pitifully small, containing only her most essential supplies and a few personal items she couldn't bear to leave behind. Everything else would stay here, waiting for someone who would never return. The thought made her throat tight. Outside, the world was painted in shades of blue and silver, the sun just beginning to crest the eastern ridge. And there, standing at the head of a formation of 25 wolves, was Alaric. He was in human form, dressed for travel in dark leather and furs. When his silver eyes met hers, something in her chest constricted painfully. "Last chance," he said quietly as she approached. "Say the word, and I'll leave you in peace." They both knew it was a lie. He'd already told her the debt wouldn't allow it, that she'd be followed and protected whether she wanted it or not. But the offer itself, the pretense of choice, was oddly comforting. "I'm coming," she said, and tried to sound more certain than she felt. Alaric nodded once, then gestured to his second. "Gareth will carry your pack. You'll ride with me." "Ride?" She blinked. "The keep is 2 days' journey north. You can't make that distance on foot in winter conditions." His expression was unreadable. "You'll shift and—" He paused, seeing her face. "Ah, right, you can't." The familiar shame crawled up her spine. "I can walk. I'm slower than wolves, but I—" "You'll ride," Alaric interrupted firmly. "Gareth, shift." The second obeyed immediately, transforming into his massive storm-gray wolf form. Alaric turned to Lyra expectantly, and she realized with dawning horror what he was suggesting. "You want me to ride a wolf?" she said flatly. "I want you to ride my second specifically. He's the steadiest, and he won't throw you even if we encounter trouble." Alaric's lips twitched with suppressed amusement. "Unless you'd prefer to ride me instead." The suggestion sent an unexpected bolt of heat through her. "No, Gareth is fine. Gareth is perfect." Alaric's smile widened into something decidedly wolfish. "Pity. Maybe another time." And before she could formulate a response to that, he was helping her onto Gareth's back. The wolf was enormous, easily tall enough that mounting him required Alaric's assistance, and his fur was thick and warm beneath her hands. She settled into position awkwardly, very aware that she had no idea what she was doing. "Hold tight to his fur," Alaric instructed. "Press with your knees to stay balanced, and whatever you do, don't fall off. Gareth's ego couldn't handle it." The wolf beneath her made a sound that was almost like laughter. Then Alaric shifted, that impossible transformation from man to massive black wolf, and the pack began to move. The journey north was unlike anything Lyra had experienced. Riding Gareth was terrifying at first. He moved with a fluid grace that made her feel like she was going to slide off at any moment, and the speed at which the pack traveled made her heart lodge firmly in her throat. But gradually, she learned to move with him, to anticipate the rhythm of his gait, to trust that he wouldn't let her fall. Alaric ran at the front, his black fur stark against the snow, and she couldn't stop watching him. He moved like liquid shadow, powerful and precise. Every few minutes, he'd glance back, checking on her, making sure she was still secure. The attention should have been suffocating. Instead, it felt almost protective. They stopped at midday in a clearing where the sun had melted through the snow to expose frozen grass beneath. The wolves formed a defensive perimeter automatically, while Gareth knelt to let her dismount. Her legs were shaking when her feet hit the ground, and she would have fallen if Alaric, now in human form, hadn't caught her elbow. "You're doing well," he said. "I feel like I've been beaten with a tree branch." "That's normal. Your muscles aren't used to riding." He guided her to a fallen log and pressed a water skin into her hands. "Drink. Eat something. We'll rest for an hour before continuing." She drank gratefully, then pulled out the dried meat and bread she'd packed. Around her, the other wolves were transforming back into human form, speaking in low voices as they checked weapons and discussed the route ahead. She felt profoundly out of place among them, these hardened warriors with their scars and their easy camaraderie. "You're staring," Alaric observed, settling onto the log beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "I'm just trying to understand." She gestured to the wolves around them. "You're the Alpha King. You command respect from the most powerful packs in 5 territories. Your inner pack is legendary, and you're using all this power to transport one worthless Omega north because she happened to open her door during a storm. You're not worthless. Everyone else seems to think so. Everyone else is wrong." He said it with such finality that she almost believed him. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Lyra?" She shook her head. "I see someone who survived alone for years in conditions that would have killed most wolves. I see someone who built a home with her own hands, who learned healing without a teacher, who chose compassion over self-preservation when it mattered most." He turned to face her fully, and his silver eyes were intense. "I see strength that has nothing to do with shifting, and that's exactly the kind of strength I need in my pack." "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why do you need that specifically?" Alaric was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "Because I'm building something that's never existed before, a pack structure where power comes from loyalty and competence, not just physical dominance, where Omegas have agency and Betas have voice, and everyone, regardless of how they were born, has a chance to matter." He looked at her. "But that vision is fragile. The old guard wants to return to the brutal hierarchy my father enforced. They see my reforms as weakness. They're waiting for any excuse to challenge me, to fracture the alliance, to return to the days when might made right." "What does that have to do with me?" "Everything." His smile was sharp. You're a symbol, little healer. An Omega who saved the Alpha King's inner pack. An Omega who earned a place in the Northern Keep through action, not through birth or favor. If I can integrate you successfully, if I can show that an Omega can have status and respect and power in my pack, it strengthens every reform I've implemented. It proves that the new way works. Understanding crashed over her like a wave. You're not just offering me a position, you're making a political statement. Yes. And if I fail? If I can't handle the pressure or the danger then I fail with you, he said simply, like it was obvious. But I don't think you're going to fail, Lyra. I think you're going to surprise everyone, including yourself. She wanted to believe him, but 23 years of being told she was worthless, broken, disposable, that wasn't something she could shake off with one conversation. What if you're wrong about me? She asked quietly. I'm not. He stood, offering his hand. Come on, we should keep moving. I want to reach the Northern Watchtower before dark. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm and solid, and he held on for a moment longer than necessary before releasing her. Alaric, she said as he turned to leave. Yes? Thank you for... She gestured helplessly. For seeing something worth saving. His expression softened in a way she hadn't seen before. Always, little healer. Always. Then he shifted, and the pack was moving again, carrying her north toward a future she still couldn't quite believe was real. They reached the Northern Watchtower just as the sun was setting. The structure was massive, a stone fortification built into the mountainside with walls 20 feet high and watchposts at every corner. It was clearly military in function, designed to monitor the northern passes and provide early warning of invasion. As they approached, Lyra could see wolves patrolling the walls, their eyes tracking their movement with professional precision. Alaric led them through the main gates, and immediately the atmosphere changed. Wolves in Northern Pack insignia saluted as he passed, their fists over their hearts, their heads bowed in respect. He acknowledged each one with a slight nod, his bearing regal and commanding. She'd known he was the Alpha King intellectually, but seeing it in practice, seeing how hundreds of wolves responded to his presence with instant obedience, brought home exactly how powerful he was, and how dangerous. They were given quarters in the Eastern Tower, a large room with multiple sleeping areas and a central fireplace. The other inner pack wolves dispersed to their own spaces, leaving Lyra alone with her racing thoughts and growing anxiety. This was really happening. Tomorrow she would reach the keep. Tomorrow her new life would begin. Tomorrow she would find out if Alaric's faith in her was justified or catastrophically misplaced. She was still staring at the fire when Gareth appeared with a tray of food. "You should eat," he said, setting it beside her. "Long day tomorrow." "I'm not hungry." "Eat anyway." He settled across from her, his scarred face thoughtful. "You're scared." It wasn't a question. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been where you are. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "I was born a beta. No alpha blood, no special gifts, just decent combat skills and a stubborn refusal to die. When Alaric offered me a position in his inner pack, I thought he was insane. I thought I'd get myself killed within a week. What changed? I realized that Alaric doesn't choose people based on their bloodline or their ability to shift. He chooses them based on their character." Gareth looked at her directly. "He chose me because I was loyal. He chose the others because they were brave or smart or skilled in ways that mattered. And he chose you because you're compassionate, because you see worth in broken things, because you're exactly what he needs to prove that the new way works." "That's a lot of pressure." "Yes," Gareth agreed. "It is. But here's the thing, little healer. You've already survived impossible pressure. You've lived alone on the borderlands for years. You've built a life from nothing. You've faced death and chosen to save others anyway." He smiled. "If you can do all that, you can survive the keep. You can survive the politics and the danger and the wolves who will test you at every turn, because you're stronger than you think you are." "I wish I believed that." "You will." He stood, stretching. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, everything changes." He paused at the door. "And Lyra, for what it's worth, I'm glad you opened your door that night. I'm glad you saved us, and I'm glad you're coming with us. The pack needs someone like you." He left before she could respond, leaving her alone with the fire and her thoughts. She lay down on the sleeping pallet and stared at the stone ceiling, listening to the sounds of the watchtower around her. Wolves moving through corridors, guards changing shifts, the distant howl of wind through the mountain passes. Tomorrow she would reach the northern keep. Tomorrow she would step into a new life. Tomorrow she would find out if Alaric's vision of a better pack was real or just another beautiful lie. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind was too full of silver eyes and impossible promises, and the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was finally going somewhere she belonged. Dawn brought another day of travel, this time through steep mountain passes where the wolves moved in tight formation, alert for danger. Lyra rode with Gareth again, more comfortable now, finding a rhythm with his movements. Alaric ran ahead, periodically sending scouts to check the path, his massive black form a constant presence at the edge of her vision. By mid-afternoon, Gareth broke the silence that had fallen between them. "We'll see it soon," he said, his voice carrying back to her. Just beyond the next ridge. The keep? The Northern Kingdom. There was pride in his voice, the heart of the 5 territories. They crested the ridge, and suddenly the entire valley spread out below them, a panorama so vast and beautiful it stole Lyra's breath. The Northern Keep wasn't merely a fortress. It was a city of stone and silver spires that seemed to grow organically from the mountainside itself. Watchtowers rose at intervals along massive walls, banners bearing the Northern Pack's insignia snapping in the wind. Beyond the walls, she could see buildings spreading downward into the valley, a sprawling community sheltered by the keep's protective embrace. But it was the scale that made her pulse quicken. This wasn't just a pack house. This was the seat of power for the most dominant force in the 5 territories, easily large enough to house thousands of wolves, with defensive walls that looked capable of withstanding any siege. "Home," Alaric said, having shifted back to human form beside her. He watched her face carefully. "What do you think?" "I think I'm severely underprepared for this." His laugh was warm. "You'll do fine, little healer. Come, there are people you need to meet." They descended toward the keep, and as they approached the main gates, Lyra could see wolves gathering, drawn by news of the Alpha King's return, by curiosity about the Omega he'd brought with him, by the desire to witness whatever was about to unfold. The gates opened, and they walked through into a massive courtyard. Hundreds of wolves lined the space, guards at attention, courtiers in fine clothes, servants pausing in their work, all of them staring, all of them trying to understand what an unknown Omega was doing wearing a cloak that marked her as high status, walking at the Alpha King's side like she belonged there. Alaric didn't slow. He cut straight through the crowd, his presence commanding instant respect, and Lyra followed in his wake with her heart hammering against her ribs. They entered the keep proper through enormous wooden doors carved with scenes of wolf packs and ancient battles. The interior was surprisingly beautiful. Soaring ceilings supported by massive timber beams, tapestries depicting pack history hanging from stone walls, fires burning in hearths large enough to roast an entire deer. But there was also an undercurrent of tension. Wolves watched them pass with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion to barely concealed hostility. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their questions, their doubts about whether she belonged here. Alaric led her through a maze of corridors, up several flights of stairs, until they finally stopped before a set of double doors on what she assumed was one of the upper levels. "Your quarters," he said, pushing them open. She stepped inside and froze. The suite was larger than her entire shelter had been. A main living area with comfortable furniture arranged around a massive fireplace. A separate sleeping chamber visible through an archway. Tall windows overlooking the mountains. And along one wall, floor-to-ceiling shelves already stocked with books and supplies. "This is too much," she said faintly. "This is appropriate for your position." Alaric moved to the windows, looking out over his territory. "Your healing room is 2 doors down, fully equipped, connected to the main infirmary. You'll have assistants if you want them, autonomy to run it as you see fit." He turned back to her. "And before you argue, yes, you've earned this. Yes, you belong here. And no, I won't accept any protests about it being too much." She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll make yourself at home. Say you'll give this a real chance." His expression softened. "Say you'll stay." The vulnerability in that last request caught her off guard. This powerful alpha, this king who commanded hundreds of wolves, was asking, not ordering, her to stay. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "I'll try. That's all I ask." He moved toward the door, then paused. "There's a formal dinner tonight. The senior pack members will be there, my advisors, the inner pack, some visiting dignitaries. I want to introduce you properly, establish your position, make it clear that you're under my protection." Her stomach dropped. "A formal dinner? With hundreds of wolves?" 20, actually. Small, intimate, just the leadership. His smile was slightly wicked. "Consider it your official welcome to court." "I don't know how to navigate court politics." "Then you'll learn quickly." He sobered. "I won't lie to you, Lyra. Tonight will be difficult. Some of my advisors still believe in the old ways, that Omegas should be seen and not heard, that your presence here undermines pack hierarchy. They'll test you, question you, try to find weaknesses." "That's supposed to make me feel better about attending?" "No, but I want you prepared." He held her gaze. "You don't have to prove yourself to them. You don't have to defend your position. You simply have to be yourself, the same Omega who opened her door to dying wolves because it was the right thing to do. Can you do that?" She thought about her shelter, about the choice she'd made during the blizzard, about the fact that she'd somehow survived this long by being exactly who she was, even when everyone told her she should be someone else. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." "Good." Alaric's smile was approving. "Dinner is at sunset. Someone will come to escort you. Until then, rest. Explore your quarters. Get comfortable." He paused at the door. "And Lyra, thank you for being brave enough to come here, for giving my vision a chance." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in quarters far too grand for a broken Omega, with a formal dinner looming and no idea how to survive what was coming. She spent the afternoon exploring. Her quarters were connected to a private bathing room, an actual bathing room with heated water and soaps that smelled of lavender and pine. She took advantage of it, washing away days of travel and trying to prepare herself mentally for the evening ahead. Someone had left clothes in the wardrobe, several dresses in rich fabrics, all in deep blues and silvers that matched her cloak. She chose the simplest one, a midnight blue gown with silver embroidery at the cuffs and collar. It fit perfectly, which suggested someone had been paying very close attention to her measurements. She was just finishing braiding her hair when a knock came at the door. "Come in," she called, expecting a servant. Instead, a female wolf entered, tall and elegant with auburn hair and sharp green eyes that assessed Lyra in one sweeping glance. She wore the black and silver of the northern pack, and her bearing suggested high rank. "You're the Omega," she said without preamble. "I'm Lyra," she corrected, lifting her chin. "And you are?" A slight smile curved the woman's lips. "Direct. I like that. I'm Alara, Alpha King's senior advisor and head of the council." She moved further into the room, her gaze taking in everything. "I'm here to escort you to dinner and give you some advice that might keep you alive." "How comforting." "I'm not here to comfort you." She settled into a chair across from Lyra, crossing her legs with casual grace. "I'm here because Alaric asked me to help you navigate tonight, and I owe him enough loyalty to try. But let's be clear. I don't understand why you're here. I don't understand what Alaric sees in an Omega who can't shift. And I certainly don't understand why he's giving you status that took the rest of us decades to earn." Her honesty was brutal and oddly refreshing. "I saved his inner pack during the blizzard," Lara said steadily. "That's why I'm here." "So I heard." Alara leaned forward, her green eyes intense. "Here's what you need to understand, Lyra. The Northern Pack is not like other packs. We don't operate on simple dominance hierarchies. We operate on competence, loyalty, and results. Alaric has spent 15 years building this structure, fighting against wolves who want to return to the brutal ways of his father's reign. Your presence here, an Omega with high status, is either proof that his vision works, or it's ammunition for his enemies to claim he's gone soft. So I'm a political liability." "You're a test case," she said bluntly. "If you succeed, if you prove that an Omega can have value beyond traditional roles, you strengthen every reform Alaric has implemented. If you fail, you give the old guard exactly what they need to challenge him." "That's a lot of pressure for one Omega to carry." "Yes," Alara agreed. "It is, which is why I'm here to help you survive tonight." She stood, smoothing her dress. "At dinner, sit where Alaric places you. Don't speak unless directly addressed. Don't rise to obvious provocations. And for the love of the old gods, don't show weakness. These wolves will test you with questions, with subtle insults, with challenges designed to make you fail. Your job is to remain calm, answer honestly, and remember that you've already earned your place here." "Have I, though?" Alara studied her for a long moment. "You opened your door to dying wolves when you had every reason to let them die. You risked your life for strangers. You showed compassion when survival instinct should have made you cruel." She paused. "I don't understand it, but I respect it. And if you can show even half that courage tonight, you'll be fine." It was the closest thing to approval Lyra had gotten from anyone except Alaric and Gareth. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet." Alara moved to the door. "Come, it's time. And Lyra, remember, you're not just representing yourself tonight. You're representing every Omega who's ever been told they're worthless. Don't let them down." The weight of that responsibility settled over Lyra like a physical thing as she followed Alara out into the corridor. Dinner awaited. And with it, the real test of whether she belonged in the Northern Keep or whether she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. The dining hall was intimate in a way that made it more intimidating, not less. A single long table dominated the space, carved from dark wood and polished to a mirror shine. Candles flickered in silver holders, casting dancing shadows on stone walls hung with tapestries depicting wolves in various stages of triumph. 20 chairs surrounded the table, and 17 of them were already occupied when Alara led Lyra through the door. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned to her. She felt their assessment like physical touch, taking in her dress, her cloak, the way she carried herself, looking for weakness, looking for proof that she didn't belong here. Alaric sat at the head of the table, and when his silver eyes met hers, something in her chest loosened slightly. He stood, and the gesture forced everyone else to stand as well, a subtle demonstration of power that wasn't lost on anyone present. "Counselors, honored guests," Alaric said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the space. "May I present Lyra, healer to the inner pack and newest member of our court." He gestured to the empty chair at his right hand, the position of highest honor, traditionally reserved for his second or his most trusted advisor. Placing her there was a statement, a declaration that she held value in his eyes. It also painted a target on her back. Lyra crossed to the chair with her head high, very aware of the weight of every gaze following her movement. Alaric held the chair for her, another deliberate gesture of respect, before reclaiming his own seat. The others settled back into their chairs with varying degrees of grace, and she could practically feel the speculation crackling through the air. "Let me make introductions," Alaric continued smoothly. "You've met Alara, my senior advisor." He gestured to the elegant auburn-haired woman now seated 3 chairs down. "To your left is Gareth, my second." Gareth grinned at her, the scar on his cheek pulling with the expression. "We're already well acquainted." A ripple of laughter moved through some of the assembled wolves, those who'd been part of the rescue, who understood the reference, but others remained stony-faced. Alaric continued around the table, naming advisors and council members whose titles and roles blurred together in Lyra's anxious mind. Military commanders, trade negotiators, territory representatives, all of them powerful, all of them watching her with expressions ranging from curious to hostile. The last introduction made her stomach drop. And finally, our guest from the Eastern Pack, Alpha Caius, here to discuss the trade agreements between our territories. The man at the far end of the table was perhaps 50, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that assessed her with the cold calculation of a predator evaluating prey. He wore the green and gold of the Eastern Pack, and something about the way he looked at her made her skin crawl. "An Omega healer," Caius said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. "How progressive of you, Alpha King, though I confess I'm surprised to see one seated at your council table. In the Eastern Territories, we find Omegas serve the pack better in more traditional roles." The challenge was immediate and unmistakable. "In the Northern Pack," Alaric said, his tone perfectly pleasant and absolutely deadly, "we find that competence matters more than tradition. Lyra saved 25 of my inner pack during the recent blizzard. That alone has earned her a place at this table." "Saved." Caius leaned back in his chair. "Or merely provided shelter? I'm sure any Omega with a warm fire could have done the same." Lyra felt Gareth tense beside her, felt the shift in atmosphere as the other wolves recognized the insult for what it was. This wasn't just about her. This was Caius testing Alaric's authority, questioning his judgment, looking for any sign of weakness. "Actually," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she'd expected, "I provided medical treatment for significant injuries, including battlefield trauma and advanced hypothermia. 3 of the wolves wouldn't have survived without immediate intervention. So, no, Alpha Caius, not just any Omega with a warm fire could have done the same." Silence fell like a blade. She'd just contradicted a visiting Alpha, defended herself, spoken out of turn, broken probably a dozen unspoken protocols about how Omegas should behave at formal dinners. But she was done being dismissed, done being told her actions didn't matter. Caius's eyes narrowed. "You have spirit, little Omega, though I wonder if spirit translates to actual skill, or merely to arrogance about basic healing knowledge." "I wonder if visiting Alphas typically insult their hosts' advisors before the first course is even served, or if that's a tradition unique to the Eastern Territories," she replied, keeping her tone carefully neutral. Gareth made a sound that might have been a strangled laugh. Several other wolves around the table were fighting smiles, though Alara looked like she couldn't decide whether to be impressed or horrified. Alaric's expression was unreadable, but she thought she saw something that might have been approval in his silver eyes. "My apologies," Caius said, though his tone suggested he felt no such thing. "I merely meant to understand what qualifies you for such an elevated position. In my experience, Omega healers are common. Omega healers with council status are unprecedented." "Then perhaps," Alaric said softly, "you should expand your experience, Caius. The world is changing. Packs that cling too tightly to tradition often find themselves left behind." It was a clear warning, a reminder that the Northern Pack's power structure and the trade agreements Caius was here to negotiate depended on Alaric's goodwill. Caius inclined his head in acknowledgement, but his eyes remained cold as they settled on Lyra. "I look forward to seeing this new world you're building, Alpha King. I hope it proves more stable than it appears." Servants entered then with the first course, and the conversation shifted to safer topics: weather, hunting, territory news. But Lyra could feel the undercurrent of tension, could sense the way certain wolves around the table were evaluating her, measuring her, deciding whether she was an asset or a liability to their king. She ate mechanically, hyper-aware of every movement, every word. Beside her, Alaric maintained easy conversation with the counselors, but she noticed how he subtly redirected any questions that might put her on the spot, how he kept the focus on pack business rather than on her personally. It was only halfway through the second course that she realized what he was doing, protecting her without making it obvious, giving her space to breathe without appearing weak. Then Alara spoke up, her green eyes fixed on Lyra with laser focus. "Lyra, you mentioned battlefield trauma. Have you had much experience with combat injuries?" It was a test, a subtle way of determining if she actually knew what she was talking about or if she'd just gotten lucky with the inner pack. "Some," she said carefully. "Mostly from treating wolves who got injured during territory disputes or hunting accidents. Claw wounds, broken bones, occasional arrow or blade injuries from confrontations with human settlements. And hypothermia treatment?" This from one of the military commanders, a grizzled male with scars crossing his face. "That's specialized knowledge. Where did you learn it?" "From necessity." She met his eyes steadily. "I've lived on the borderlands for years, alone. When you're the only healer available during harsh winters, you either learn how to treat cold exposure or you watch people die. I chose to learn." "Self-taught, then?" Another advisor, a female with calculating eyes. "My mother taught me the basics before she died. Everything else I learned through trial and error and reading every medical text I could get my hands on." "Trial and error," Caius repeated, and there was condescension in every syllable. "How reassuring. I'm sure the Alpha King's inner pack felt very confident in your trial and error approach while they were bleeding out." Her temper flared. "The Alpha King's inner pack is alive because of my trial and error approach. Would you have preferred I let them die while I waited for someone with more impressive credentials to arrive?" "I would have preferred the Alpha King's inner pack not require rescuing by a lone Omega in the first place," Caius shot back. "Perhaps if they'd been better trained, they wouldn't have needed—" "Enough!" Alaric's voice cut through the room like a knife. Not loud, but absolutely commanding. "Caius, you've made your position clear. You disapprove of my choice to honor Lyra's actions with a position in my court. Noted. But this is the Northern Pack, and here we value results over pedigree. Lyra saved my wolves. She's earned her place, and any further questioning of her qualifications will be taken as a direct insult to me personally." The threat was unmistakable. Caius settled back in his chair, his expression neutral, but his eyes promising future retaliation. "Of course, Alpha King. I meant no disrespect." "Didn't you?" Alaric's smile was sharp. "How fortunate, then, that I'm choosing to interpret it generously." The rest of dinner passed in strained civility. Conversation moved to trade agreements and territorial negotiations, topics where Lyra had nothing to contribute and was grateful to remain silent. But she could feel the weight of judgment still hanging over her, could sense that she'd made enemies tonight simply by existing in a space where some wolves thought she didn't belong. When the meal finally ended, Alaric stood, and once again everyone else rose with him. "Counselors, thank you for joining us tonight. Alara, I'll need those reports on the southern border by morning. Gareth, schedule training exercises for the inner pack. I want everyone back to full combat readiness within the week." His silver eyes swept the room, missing nothing. "We're dismissed." The wolves filed out in clusters, some casting curious glances Lyra's way, others studiously ignoring her. Caius paused near the door, his gaze lingering on her with an intensity that made her instincts scream danger. Then he was gone, and only Alaric, Gareth, Alara, and Lyra remained. "Well," Gareth said, breaking the silence, "that went about as badly as expected." "Actually," Alara said thoughtfully, "it could have been worse." She held her ground against Caius, answered questions competently, and didn't cry or run from the room. By Omega standards at formal dinners with hostile visiting alphas, I'd call that a success. "By Omega standards," Lyra repeated, torn between offense and exhaustion. "She means you exceeded expectations," Alaric said, and there was definite approval in his voice now. "Which isn't to say it was easy. Caius was testing me through you, seeing if I'd defend my choices or back down under pressure. And did I help or hurt your position?" "You helped." He moved closer, studying her face. "You stood up for yourself without being insubordinate. You demonstrated actual knowledge instead of just claiming it. And you made it clear you won't be easily dismissed." His smile was slight, but genuine. "Well done, little healer." The praise made something warm bloom in her chest. "I probably made enemies tonight." You definitely made enemies tonight, Alaric confirmed. Caius will report back to the Eastern Pack that you're arrogant and overconfident. Half my council thinks you're a liability, and the traditionalists are already planning how to use your presence to challenge Alaric's reforms. Again, how comforting. But, Gareth interjected, the other half of the council is impressed. The Inner Pack already respects you, and you proved tonight that you can handle pressure without breaking. He grinned. Plus, watching you verbally spar with Caius was the most entertainment we've had at a formal dinner in years. I'm so glad my suffering amuses you. Your suffering amuses everyone, Alaric said, but his tone was gentle. Come, I'll walk you back to your quarters. You've had enough politics for one night. Alara and Gareth said their goodnights and left, leaving Lyra alone with Alaric in the flickering candlelight of the dining hall. I meant what I said, he told her, as they walked through the quiet corridors. You did well tonight, better than I'd hoped. I insulted a visiting alpha. You defended yourself against a visiting alpha who was using you to insult me. There's a difference. They climbed the stairs toward her quarters, and she was suddenly very aware of how close he was, how his presence seemed to fill the space around them. Caius came here to evaluate my strength, to see if my reforms have made the Northern Pack vulnerable. By showing him that even my Omega healer can stand up to an alpha, you proved the opposite. They reached her door, and she turned to face him. What happens now? Now, you rest. Tomorrow you'll meet with the infirmary staff. Familiarize yourself with the healing facilities. Start settling into your role. His expression was serious. It won't get easier, Lyra. Tonight was just the beginning. There will be more challenges, more tests, more wolves looking for any excuse to prove you don't belong here. That's not particularly encouraging. No, but here's what is encouraging. You've already survived things that should have killed you. You've already proven you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for, and you're not alone anymore. He reached out and adjusted her cloak, a gesture that felt almost protective. You have the Inner Pack's loyalty. You have my protection. And whether you believe it yet or not, you have a place here that no one can take away unless you let them. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this could work, that she could build a life here. But 23 years of disappointment and rejection weren't erased by one successful dinner. Thank you, she said quietly, for defending me tonight, for believing I could handle it. Always, little healer. His silver eyes were intense in the dim light. Sleep well. Tomorrow is a new beginning. He turned and walked away, leaving Lyra standing in her doorway with her heart racing and her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She stepped inside her quarters and closed the door, leaning against it as the weight of the evening finally crashed over her. She'd survived her first formal dinner at court. She'd stood up to a hostile alpha. She'd made enemies and maybe, possibly, earned a tiny measure of respect. But as she changed into night clothes and climbed into the absurdly comfortable bed, she couldn't shake the memory of Caius's cold eyes. She couldn't forget the way some of the counselors had looked at her, like she was a problem to be solved. Alaric was building something new, something revolutionary, and she was apparently at the center of it, whether she wanted to be or not. She just hoped she was strong enough to survive what came next, because something told her the real test was still to come. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of overwhelming newness. True to his word, Alaric gave Lyra autonomy over the healing facilities. The infirmary was larger than her entire shelter had been, stocked with supplies she'd only dreamed of, staffed by 3 assistant healers who regarded her with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. She threw herself into the work, organizing supplies, treating minor injuries, learning the rhythms of the keep. Work was safe. Work was something she understood. The politics, however, were a minefield she navigated with decreasing success. The traditionalists on the council made their disapproval clear through 1,000 small cuts. They forgot to invite her to important meetings. They questioned her medical decisions in front of patients. They spoke over her during discussions and dismissed her input as the Omega's perspective, said with just enough condescension to make the insult clear. She endured it, kept her head down, focused on her patients, and tried to ignore the whispers that followed her through the corridors. But it was the visiting delegations that wore her down most. Word had spread through the 5 territories about Alaric's unprecedented decision to give an Omega Council status. Other packs sent representatives, some genuinely curious about the reforms, others clearly looking for evidence that the Northern Pack had grown weak. Each delegation brought new challenges, new tests, new ways of making it clear they found her presence offensive. Alaric defended her every time, publicly, firmly, without hesitation, and she hated it. Not because she didn't appreciate his protection, she did, but because every defense made her feel more like a burden than an asset, more like a political statement than a person. More like she was proving the traditionalists right, that she was a weakness Alaric had to constantly shield. It all came to a head on a gray afternoon in her 4th week at the keep. She was in the infirmary, stitching a deep gash on a young guard's arm, a training accident, he'd said, though the wound looked more like it came from a deliberate blade strike than an accident. She was focused on her work, carefully placing each stitch, when the door slammed open. 3 wolves entered, all wearing the insignia of the council guard, all carrying themselves with the aggressive confidence of those who believed they had authority on their side. The leader was a male she recognized from council meetings, Marcus, one of the senior traditionalists who'd made his disapproval of her abundantly clear from day one. "Omega," he said, not bothering with her name. "You're needed in the main hall. Council session, now." She didn't look up from her stitching. "I'm with a patient. Whatever it is can wait until I'm finished." "It can't wait." Marcus stepped closer, and she felt the young guard tense beneath her hands. "Alpha King's orders. You're to attend immediately." That made her pause. Alaric knew better than to summon her mid-treatment. He'd made it clear that her medical work took precedence over politics, unless it was a true emergency. "What's the emergency?" she asked, tying off the final stitch and beginning to bandage the wound. "The council has questions about your handling of the supply shortage in the Eastern Infirmary. There are concerns about your competence." Her hands stilled. The Eastern Infirmary was a small facility she'd reorganized 2 weeks ago, redistributing supplies more efficiently after discovering they'd been hoarding medications while the main infirmary ran short. It had been a logical, necessary decision, one that had improved patient care across the board. It had also embarrassed the healer who'd been running the Eastern facility, a traditionalist who'd made no secret of his belief that Omegas had no business managing medical facilities. "My competence," she repeated slowly, finishing the bandage. "Based on what evidence?" "That's what the council wants to discuss with you. Now." Marcus's smile was cold. "Unless you're refusing a direct summons from the Alpha King." It was a trap. She could feel it. But refusing would be worse than walking into whatever they had planned. "Fine." She stood, removing her bloodied apron and washing her hands quickly. "Let's go." The walk to the main hall felt like a march to execution. Wolves stopped what they were doing to watch them pass, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed satisfaction. Word had spread fast. The Omega was finally being called to account. The main hall was packed when they arrived, not just the council, but dozens of other wolves, witnesses, she realized, an audience for whatever public humiliation they had planned. Alaric stood at the head of the room, his expression unreadable. Alara was beside him, her face carefully neutral. Gareth leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, looking furious but contained. And standing in the center of the room, wearing an expression of injured dignity, was the healer she'd displaced from the Eastern Infirmary. "Ah, Lyra," said Counselor Marcus. "Thank you for joining us. We have concerns about your recent reorganization of medical supplies." She kept her voice level. "What concerns?" "The Eastern Infirmary healer has brought to our attention that your redistribution of their supplies has left them dangerously understocked. He reports that they're now unable to treat serious injuries and that this puts wolves in that sector at risk." It was a lie. A complete, calculated lie. "That's not accurate," she said clearly. The Eastern Infirmary was overstocked on non-essential supplies while hoarding critical medications. I redistributed to ensure all facilities had appropriate resources based on patient volume and injury frequency. The Eastern Infirmary now has exactly what it needs. No more, no less. You question my professional assessment? The healer demanded, his voice dripping with offense. I've been a pack healer for 30 years. You're an untrained Omega who's been here less than a month, and you think you know better than I do what my facility needs? I think the supply logs speak for themselves, she replied steadily. The Eastern Infirmary had enough fever reducers stockpiled to treat the entire keep twice over while the main infirmary was rationing. That's not sound medical practice. That's hoarding. That's your interpretation, Marcus interjected smoothly. As an Omega with no formal training, no oversight, and frankly, no business making decisions that affect pack welfare. She has the Alpha King's authority to make those decisions, Alara said sharply. Does she? Marcus turned to Alaric with carefully crafted concern. Alpha King, with all due respect, this situation highlights exactly what many of us have been trying to explain. Giving unprecedented authority to an unqualified Omega, no matter how well-intentioned, creates risks. She may have saved the inner pack during the blizzard, and for that we're grateful, but gratitude shouldn't override common sense. She lacks the training, the experience, and frankly, the judgment necessary for her position. Are you suggesting I made an error in judgment, Marcus? Alaric's voice was dangerously soft. I'm suggesting that perhaps the debt has been paid, that Lyra has been honored appropriately for her actions, and that it's time to acknowledge that some roles require more than good intentions. Marcus spread his hands reasonably. She could continue as a healer, of course, under proper supervision, but council status, access to restricted facilities, that level of trust and responsibility should be reserved for wolves who've proven themselves through years of service, not one dramatic rescue. Lyra's stomach dropped. This wasn't just about the supply distribution. This was a coordinated effort to strip away her position, to reduce her back to what they thought an Omega should be, useful perhaps, but firmly subordinate. She looked at Alaric, trying to read his expression. He was watching her, not the council, and something in his silver eyes made her breath catch. He was waiting to see what she would do, whether she would defend herself or wait for him to defend her again. And suddenly, she was furious at the constant tests, furious at the endless need to prove herself, furious at being treated like a problem to be managed rather than a person with actual value, furious at Alaric for putting her in this impossible position in the first place. You want to talk about judgment? She said, and her voice came out harder than she'd intended. Let's talk about judgment. The healer has been hoarding medical supplies in a facility that treats maybe 20 wolves a month, while the main infirmary, which treats hundreds, was running critically short. That's not medical oversight. That's ego and territoriality, putting wolves at risk. How dare you? The healer started. I'm not finished. She turned to face Marcus directly. You say I lack training and experience. You're right. I'm self-taught. I learned healing alone through trial and error because no one thought a human-locked Omega deserved proper instruction. But I also learned something you apparently didn't in all your years of formal training, that medical resources exist to save lives, not to hoard for status. This is exactly the kind of arrogance, Marcus began. You want to reduce my role, strip my authority? Fine. The word came out sharp as broken glass. But let's be honest about what this is really about. It's not about competence or qualifications. It's about the fact that you can't stand seeing an Omega with status equal to yours. You can't handle the idea that someone you consider broken and worthless proved herself more valuable than you in a single night of a blizzard. The room went dead silent. She'd gone too far. She knew it the moment the words left her mouth, but she was past caring. You're right that I don't belong here, she continued, and her voice shook with barely suppressed emotion. Not because I'm unqualified, but because I'm exhausted. Exhausted from the constant tests, the endless judgment, the daily reminders that most of you would rather I didn't exist. I've spent 4 weeks trying to prove I deserve to be here, and it's never enough. It will never be enough because you've already decided what I am." She turned to Alaric, and something in her chest cracked open. "You wanted me to be a symbol, proof that your reforms work, that Omegas can have value in your new pack structure. But I'm not a symbol. I'm a person, and I can't keep being your political statement while everyone around me waits for me to fail." Alaric's expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his silver eyes. Surprise, maybe, or pain. "So, here's my answer to your concerns, Counselor Marcus," she said, turning back to face the assembled wolves. "I'm done. You want to strip my authority? Consider it surrendered. You want me back in a subordinate role? Congratulations, you win. I'll continue working in the infirmary as a basic healer under whatever supervision makes you comfortable. But I'm done trying to be something I was never meant to be." She pulled off her cloak, the beautiful midnight blue cloak that marked her as high status, as protected, as valued, and set it carefully on the table. "Thank you for the opportunity, Alpha King, but I think we both know this was a mistake." Then she walked out of the main hall, through the shocked silence, past the staring wolves, and didn't look back. She made it halfway to her quarters before the anger dissolved into something that felt dangerously close to grief. She'd tried so hard, given everything she had, and it still hadn't been enough. She was so focused on her spiraling thoughts that she didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a hand caught her arm. She spun, expecting Alaric or Gareth or Alara coming to lecture her about politics and duty. And it was Caius, the visiting alpha from the Eastern Pack. Still here, apparently, still watching everything with those cold, calculating eyes. "That was quite a performance, little Omega," he said, and his smile made her skin crawl. "Tell me, are you always this self-destructive? Or is it a special talent you've developed for the Northern Pack?" She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, not painfully but firmly enough to make his point. "What do you want?" "To make you an offer." His eyes glittered with something predatory. "You clearly don't belong here. The Northern Pack doesn't appreciate what you have to offer. But the Eastern Territories, we understand the value of talented healers, especially ones with your particular fortitude." Understanding crashed over her. "You want me to defect? I want to give you an option beyond this gilded cage Alaric has built for you." Caius leaned closer, and she could smell smoke and foreign spices on his skin. "Come to the Eastern Pack. No political games, no tests, no pretending to be something you're not. Just honest work, fair compensation, and freedom from this endless judgment." It was tempting, dangerously tempting. But some instinct, the same one that had made her open her door during the blizzard, told her this was a trap wrapped in false promises. "No," she said firmly. "Thank you for the offer, but no." His expression hardened. "You sure? Because I don't think you understand how badly you just damaged your position here. You publicly defied the council, insulted senior members, and rejected the Alpha King's protection. There's no coming back from that, little Omega. You're finished here." "Then I'm finished here." She pulled free of his grip. "But I'm not going with you." "Pity." Caius stepped back, and his smile was sharp as a blade. "I would have treated you far better than Alaric ever could. But if you'd rather fall with the Northern Pack's failed experiment, that's your choice." He walked away, leaving Lyra standing alone in the corridor, trembling with adrenaline and the growing certainty that she'd just made everything infinitely worse. She didn't go back to her quarters. Instead, she found herself in the infirmary, in the small supply room where no one would think to look for her. She sank to the floor among the bandages and medications, wrapped her arms around her knees, and let herself finally, privately, break down. She'd tried so hard, fought so desperately to prove she belonged, and she'd failed. Worse, she'd probably destroyed Alaric's reforms in the process, given the traditionalists exactly the ammunition they needed to argue that Omegas couldn't handle positions of authority. She'd been at the keep for 4 weeks, and it had taken exactly 4 weeks for her to prove everyone right, that she was broken, arrogant, and completely unsuited for the role Alaric had given her. The door opened. She didn't look up, couldn't bear to see whether it was Alaric coming to dismiss her, or Alara coming to lecture her, or Gareth coming to say he'd been wrong about her strength. "Little healer," Alaric's voice was soft. "Careful. We need to talk." "I know," she said to the floor. "I'll pack my things. I'll leave quietly. I won't make this any harder for you than I already have." "Look at me, Lyra." She didn't want to, but something in his tone made it impossible to refuse. She raised her eyes to find him crouched in front of her, still in his formal council clothes, his silver eyes intense with an emotion she couldn't name. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "What?" "You're not leaving. You're not packing, and you're definitely not surrendering your position because Marcus and his faction of cowards managed to make you feel small." His voice was firm, but there was something gentle underneath. "Do you know what I saw in that hall tonight?" She shook her head. "I saw an Omega stand up to a coordinated attack by some of the most powerful wolves in my council. I saw you defend your decisions with facts and logic instead of appeals to authority. I saw you call out hoarding and poor judgment without flinching." He reached out and tilted her chin up, forcing her to hold his gaze. "And I saw you finally stop waiting for me to rescue you and rescue yourself instead." "But I failed. I gave up my position. "You claimed your agency," he interrupted. "You made it clear that you're not here to be my political symbol, that you have your own boundaries and needs. That's not failure, Lyra. That's exactly the kind of strength I've been trying to build in this pack." "The Council will never accept me now. I insulted them. "The Council will accept what I tell them to accept." His smile was sharp. "And what I'm telling them is that you're staying, with full authority restored, because you were absolutely right about the supply hoarding, about the healer's ego-endangering patient care, and about the fact that most of them are too busy protecting their status to care about actual competence." She stared at him. "You can't just... They'll revolt." "Let them try." He stood, pulling her to her feet with him. "I've been too gentle with the traditionalists, letting them test you, thinking they'd eventually come around. Tonight proved they won't. So we're done playing their games." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm calling their bluff. Tomorrow I'm making it clear that any counselor who can't work with you is welcome to step down, that the reforms are permanent, that the Northern Pack moves forward or not at all." His silver eyes were fierce. "And it means you're going to stop apologizing for taking up space. You earned your place here, Lyra. It's time you believe that." "What if I can't? What if they're right, and I really am just a broken Omega pretending to be something I'm not?" Alaric cupped her face in his hands, and the gentleness of the gesture nearly undid her. "Then you're a broken Omega who saved 25 lives in a blizzard, who reorganized an entire medical system in 4 weeks, who stood up to hostile alphas and councils and constant judgment without breaking." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "You're allowed to be exhausted, Lyra. You're allowed to be angry. You're even allowed to doubt yourself. But you are not allowed to give up, not when we're this close." "Close to what?" "To proving that the new way works. To building a pack where value isn't determined by bloodline or ability to shift. To creating something better." He paused. "And maybe, if I'm being honest, close to something that has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the fact that I've spent 4 weeks watching you be brave when you had every reason to run. And I'm starting to think—" He stopped himself, but the air between them suddenly felt electric. "Think what?" she whispered. "That's a conversation for another time," he said quietly, releasing her face. "First, we survive tomorrow's council session. Then," his smile was slight and surprisingly uncertain, "then we'll see." He left before she could ask what that meant, before she could process the implication, before she could do anything but stand there with her heart racing and her entire world tilting on its axis. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. But tonight she would rest. And tomorrow she would face the council again. Only this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. As she made her way back to her quarters, a strange sensation settled over her, something that felt almost like hope. She'd tried to surrender her position and found Alaric unwilling to accept her surrender. She'd exposed herself completely, shown him every doubt and fear, and instead of seeing weakness, he'd seen strength. And in the quiet space between those realizations, a dangerous thought took root. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken after all. Maybe she was exactly what the Northern Pack needed. A healer who understood what it meant to be cast aside. An Omega who refused to stay in her designated place. A symbol, yes, but on her own terms. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The traditionalists wouldn't surrender easily. Caius was still lurking, waiting for any opportunity to exploit weakness. And somewhere in the shadows, the threat of rebellion still loomed. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at the keep, Lyra went to sleep without questioning whether she belonged here. She did belong. Not because Alaric said so, but because she'd claimed her place, defended it, and refused to be diminished. And that, she was beginning to understand, was what real strength looked like. Strength that had nothing to do with the ability to shift. Strength that came from compassion and conviction, and the courage to stand alone when necessary. Strength that might just be enough to change everything. In the darkness of her room, as she drifted toward sleep, her fingers brushed against something tucked into her pillow. A small leather-bound book, ancient and worn. She hadn't noticed it before. She opened it carefully, squinting at the faded writing on the first page. The Ancient Code, it read. Truths of the old ways before the Great Divide. Lyra's breath caught. This was the text her mother had spoken of, the forbidden knowledge that alphas had kept hidden for generations, and someone had placed it in her room, deliberately, secretly. A note fell from between the pages, written in an elegant hand she didn't recognize. For the Omega who sees worth in broken things, some traditions deserve to be remembered. The implications made her heart race. Someone in the keep had access to forbidden texts. Someone wanted her to have this knowledge. Someone was watching, waiting, playing a game she didn't yet understand. She tucked the book beneath her mattress, too exhausted to begin reading tonight, but too cautious to leave it in the open. Tomorrow would bring the council confrontation, but after that, she would discover exactly what secrets the ancient code contained, and why someone wanted her to know them. Dawn broke over the northern keep with an angry red glow that painted the stone walls the color of fresh blood. Lyra stood at her window, the ancient code clutched in her hands, her mind racing with revelations. She'd spent the hours before sunrise poring over the forbidden text, and what she'd discovered had shaken her to her core. The book spoke of times before the Great Divide, when wolves and humans first separated their lineages, when the first alphas rose to power not through birthright, but through service to the pack. It spoke of Omegas as the spiritual heart of wolf society, keepers of ancient wisdom, healers not just of the body, but of the soul. And most shocking of all, it spoke of those like her, the human-locked Omegas, not as broken mistakes, but as something revered. Soul healers, the text called them. Wolves whose power manifested not in physical transformation, but in the ability to reach into the spiritual essence of the pack, to mend fractures in the pack bond, to heal wounds no herb or poultice could touch, to see into the very heart of another wolf and repair what had been damaged. The most dangerous page, the one that had stolen her breath, spoke of the curse of the Alpha Kings, a warning from the earliest days that without the balance of a soul healer, the royal bloodline would slowly poison itself, generation after generation. Each successive alpha would grow more susceptible to rage, to violence, to the madness that came from too much power unchecked by compassion. Alphas had hidden this knowledge for centuries, had systematically eliminated human-locked Omegas or relegated them to the lowest positions, not because they were worthless, but because they were feared. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. She quickly hid the book beneath her pillow before calling, "Come in." Alara entered, her face grave. "It's time," she said simply. "The council has gathered. Alaric sent me to bring you." "How bad is it?" Lyra asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The worst political crisis since he took the throne 15 years ago. Alara's green eyes were sharp with concern. Marcus has rallied the traditionalists. Half the council is threatening to withdraw support if Alaric doesn't rescind your position. Caius is watching like a vulture, ready to report any sign of weakness back to the Eastern Territories. She paused. And Alaric, he's different this morning. Harder, colder. I've never seen him like this. A chill crept down Lyra's spine. The book's warnings echoed in her mind. Could it be happening already? The curse taking hold? Lyra. Alara stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Be careful today. There are forces at work beyond politics. I don't know who gave you the ancient code, but if you've read it, you understand the danger. Shock froze Lyra in place. How did you... I've seen it before. My grandmother was keeper of the old knowledge before she was silenced. Something fierce flashed in Alara's eyes. There's a reason I support Alaric's reforms, despite my reservations about you. I've seen what happens when alphas rule unchecked. I've watched the madness grow. Is that what's happening to Alaric? It's been happening slowly for years. He fights it better than his father did, but the rage is there, building. And today... Alara shook her head. Today will test his control like nothing before. Lyra's hands trembled as she fastened her cloak. The same midnight blue one she'd discarded the night before returned to her quarters while she slept. She thought of Alaric's silver eyes, how they sometimes flashed with something ancient and predatory, how his control seemed absolute until it suddenly, frighteningly, wasn't. What can I do? She asked. I don't know. The old ways are mostly lost. But if what the book says is true, if you truly are what I think you are... Alara squared her shoulders. Just be ready, for anything. They walked in tense silence to the council chamber. Even the air felt different this morning, charged with anticipation, with the sense that something momentous was about to occur. Wolves lined the corridors, watching them pass, their expressions ranging from hostile to hopeful. News of the confrontation had spread throughout the keep. Everyone knew that today would decide the future of the Northern Pack. The doors to the council chamber swung open, revealing a scene of barely contained chaos. The circular room was packed beyond capacity, with wolves standing along the walls, filling every available space. The massive round table at the center was surrounded by council members, clearly divided into factions. Marcus and the traditionalists sat together in a tight group, their faces set in expressions of righteous determination. Gareth and the inner pack stood opposite them, hands resting casually on weapon hilts, a silent reminder of where the military power lay. And at the head of the table, Alaric stood alone, his back to the enormous hearth fire, his silver eyes reflecting the flames in a way that made them seem almost molten. He wore full ceremonial regalia, black leather adorned with silver symbols of office, the crown of the Alpha King, a simple band of twisted silver resting on his brow. He looked every inch the ruler, powerful and dangerous and utterly in command, until Lyra met his eyes and saw something flicker there that sent fear coursing through her veins. A darkness behind the silver, a shadow that didn't belong. The curse, she thought, the madness that came with the crown, with generations of alphas ruling without the balance they needed. Lyra, he said, and his voice was winter itself, cold and unforgiving. Join us. She crossed the room, acutely aware of every gaze following her movement. Alaric gestured to the empty chair at his right hand, the same position of honor she'd occupied at dinner. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. She was still his chosen advisor, still under his protection, still the focus of the battle about to take place. As she took her seat, Marcus rose from his face flushed with indignation. Alpha King, before we begin these proceedings, I must formally protest the Omega's presence. After her behavior yesterday, her disrespect to this council. Her name, Alaric interrupted, each word precise as a blade strike, is Lyra. You will address her properly, counselor, or you will not address her at all." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Marcus faltered, then recovered. "As you wish, Alpha King. I formally protest Lyra's presence at this council after her display of insubordination yesterday." "Noted," Alaric said, and dismissed. A murmur rippled through the assembled wolves. This wasn't the diplomatic Alaric they were used to, the king who listened to all sides before making decisions. This was something else, something harder and more dangerous. "Now," Alaric continued, his gaze sweeping the room, "let us speak plainly. Yesterday, a faction of this council orchestrated a public attack on my appointed healer. They used lies about supply shortages, manufactured a crisis, and attempted to strip her of the authority I granted her." His voice remained level, but Lyra could feel the rage building beneath it, like pressure before a storm. This was not merely an attack on Lyra. It was a direct challenge to my rule, to my vision for this pack, to the reforms that have made us the strongest territory in the Alliance. "Alpha King," Marcus protested, "we acted out of concern for—" "Silence!" Alaric didn't raise his voice, but the word cracked like a whip. Marcus fell back into his chair, eyes wide. "You acted out of fear. Fear of change. Fear of losing the privileges you've enjoyed under a system that values bloodline over merit. Fear that if an Omega can rise to council status, your own position might not be as secure as you thought." He placed his hands flat on the table and leaned forward slightly. "For 15 years, I have led this pack away from my father's legacy. I have built a structure where strength comes from loyalty, not terror, where Omegas have rights, where Betas have voice, where each wolf is judged by their contributions, not their ability to shift or their place in the hierarchy." His silver eyes locked with Marcus's. "For 15 years, I have tolerated resistance. I have compromised. I have moved slowly to give tradition time to adapt. That ends today." The tension in the room was suffocating. Lyra could see the divisions hardening, wolves shifting subtly to align themselves with one faction or the other. And through it all, she watched Alaric, saw the shadow behind his eyes growing darker, felt the barely contained violence in his stillness. "Today," Alaric said, straightening to his full height, "each of you will make a choice. You will declare your support for the reforms and for Lyra's position on this council, or you will resign your seat and leave the Northern Pack." Gasps and exclamations filled the room. This was beyond what anyone had expected. A purge of the council unseen in generations. "You can't do this," Marcus sputtered, rising from his chair again. "The council has rights, traditions. You can't simply exile those who disagree with you." "I'm not exiling anyone who disagrees with me," Alaric replied, each word sharp as ice. "I welcome disagreement. I welcome debate. What I will no longer tolerate is sabotage from within. Wolves who claim loyalty while undermining everything we're building." His gaze swept the room again. "So choose. Now. Stand with the new way, or leave with the old. There will be no middle ground." The council erupted into chaos, wolves arguing, shouting, some pleading for compromise. Through it all, Alaric remained unnaturally still, watching with those silver eyes that seemed to grow colder by the moment. Beside him, Lyra could feel a change happening, something terrible and ancient awakening. The curse of the Alpha Kings, the darkness that came from power without balance, was taking hold before her eyes. Slowly, order reasserted itself. Sienna was the first to stand. "I support the Alpha King," she declared, her voice ringing clear above the diminishing noise. "I support the reforms, and I recognize Lyra as a rightful member of this council." Gareth stood next. "The inner pack stands with our Alpha, and with Lyra." One by one, wolves rose to declare their allegiance. Many that Lyra had thought opposed her stood with Alaric, their survival instincts overriding their ideological concerns. When the declarations finished, only Marcus and 5 other traditionalists remained seated, their faces masks of bitter resignation. Marcus rose slowly, his dignity intact despite his defeat. "I cannot serve in a pack that abandons its core values," he said stiffly. I believe you're making a grave mistake, Alpha King. I believe these reforms will destroy what has made the Northern Pack great, but I also acknowledge your right to rule as you see fit." He inclined his head, the gesture containing both respect and defiance. "I will leave by week's end." The other 5 traditionalists nodded their agreement. Alaric's expression remained unchanged, carved from stone. "You will leave with honor," he said, his voice so controlled it was frightening, "with full provisions and letters of recommendation to any pack that will take you. Your service is appreciated, even if our visions no longer align." It was more generosity than Marcus deserved, a final demonstration that even in victory, Alaric maintained the principles he fought for. The traditionalist seemed to recognize this. His expression softened slightly. "Thank you, Alpha King." He glanced at Lyra, and she was surprised to see something almost like regret in his eyes. "I hope I'm wrong about this, for all our sakes." He turned to leave, the other traditionalists falling in behind him. As they reached the door, it swung open to reveal Caius, the Eastern Alpha, standing there with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Such drama," he drawled, stepping into the room as the traditionalists filed past him. "A council purge before breakfast. You northern wolves certainly know how to start the day." Alaric's face went completely blank, a mask that hid everything but promised nothing good. "This is a private council session, Caius. You weren't invited." "And missed the most significant political shift in 15 years? I think not." Caius moved to the center of the room with the casual arrogance of one who believed himself untouchable. "Besides, I came to deliver a message. The Southern Territories have declared their independence from the Alliance. 3 packs, formally withdrawn, effective immediately." Stunned silence fell over the chamber. The Southern Territories breaking away? It would shatter the fragile peace Alaric had maintained for 15 years, potentially trigger war between the territories. "When?" Alaric asked, his voice deadly quiet. "The messengers arrived at dawn." Caius's smile widened. "Such interesting timing, don't you think? Almost as if they knew the Northern Pack would be distracted by internal matters." Lyra felt cold certainty settle in her chest. This was no coincidence. Caius had known this was coming, had perhaps even helped orchestrate it. His presence here, his attempts to recruit her, his constant testing of Alaric's patience, it had all been part of a larger strategy to weaken the Northern Pack at a crucial moment. "You knew," she said, the accusation slipping out before she could stop it. Caius turned to her, his eyes gleaming with malice poorly disguised as amusement. "Clever little Omega. Perhaps too clever for your own safety." He turned back to Alaric. "The Eastern Pack remains neutral, of course. We have no interest in territorial disputes. But I thought you should know that the rebels are claiming your progressive policies have weakened the Alliance, that your obsession with elevating Omegas beyond their natural place has made you unfit to lead." Alaric went completely still, the kind of stillness that precedes catastrophic violence. "Get out," he said, so quietly Lyra barely heard it. "I beg your pardon?" Caius raised an eyebrow. "Get out of my keep." Alaric's voice remained low, controlled, but something had changed in his eyes. The silver was darkening, black bleeding in from the edges like ink in water. "Now, before I forget that you're here as a diplomatic guest." Caius must have seen the danger because his smug expression faltered. "Of course, Alpha King. I've delivered my message, but consider, the rebellion can still be contained if you act decisively. Return to traditional values, demonstrate strength, show the territories that the Northern Pack remains, as it has always been, a pillar of the old ways." "Go," Alaric said again, and this time there was a growl underneath the word, something inhuman and terrifying. Caius bowed, mockingly formal, and backed toward the door. "I'll take my leave, but remember, Alaric, some changes can't be undone. Some traditions exist for a reason. The old ways protected us from certain dangers." His gaze flickered meaningfully to Alaric's eyes, and Lyra knew with sudden certainty that Caius had seen the darkness there, that he knew about the curse, that perhaps he'd been counting on it. The doors closed behind the Eastern Alpha, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Alaric stood motionless, his breathing shallow, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Everyone out," he said finally, his voice strained. "Council dismissed. Gareth, gather the inner pack and the military commanders. We meet in 1 hour to discuss the Southern Rebellion." The room emptied quickly, wolves sensing the danger radiating from their Alpha King. Only Lyra remained seated, watching Alaric with growing concern as the shadow behind his eyes spread, darkening the silver to gunmetal gray. "You should go too," he said without looking at her. "No." She rose slowly, moving toward him with the careful precision of someone approaching a wounded predator. "I'm not leaving you like this." "Like what?" His laugh was harsh, humorless. "Like a king who just purged his council? Like an alpha facing rebellion? Like a fool who thought he could change centuries of tradition without consequence? Like someone fighting a battle inside himself," she said quietly. "A battle you've been fighting alone for too long." He went rigid. "What are you talking about?" "I know about the curse." The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. "The darkness that comes with the crown, the madness that grows with each generation of Alpha Kings who rule without balance." His head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers, and the shock she saw there confirmed everything. The silver was now more black than light, the darkness having consumed almost all the brightness. "Who told you?" he demanded, his voice rough. "I found the ancient code." "No point hiding it now. Someone left it in my quarters. I know what I am, Alaric, what I was meant to be, what your ancestors feared enough to try to erase from history." "Soul healer," he whispered, the words half reverence, half accusation. She nodded. "The Omega who can't shift because her power manifests differently. The balance to the Alpha's strength, the one who can reach into the spiritual essence of the pack and heal what's broken." "Then you know why you need to leave." He turned away from her, bracing his hands on the table, his head bowed. "The darkness is winning, Lyra. I've felt it growing for years. The rage, the violence, the desire to rule through fear instead of loyalty. I've fought it every day since I took the crown, and I'm losing." "That's why you brought me here, isn't it?" Understanding dawned, pieces falling into place. "Not just as a symbol of your reforms, not just to prove Omegas have value. You brought me here because you hoped I could save you from becoming your father." His silence was answer enough. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "How could I?" He looked over his shoulder at her, and the pain in his eyes, visible even through the encroaching darkness, made her heart ache. "Ask you to leave everything behind because of an ancient legend? Burden you with the weight of my salvation? Force you to be something you might not even be capable of becoming? So instead, you made me a political symbol." The hurt in her voice was impossible to hide. "Used me to prove your reforms could work." "I gave you what I could," he said softly. "Status, protection, a place where your healing gifts would be valued. I hoped it would be enough, that simply having you near might slow the darkness, and if the legend proved true, if you developed the abilities of a soul healer, then perhaps—" He shook his head. "It was selfish. I know that now." "It wasn't selfish." She moved closer, close enough to see the tremors running through his powerful frame as he fought for control. "It was desperate and understandable." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Understanding won't save the Northern Pack, won't stop me from becoming what I've fought against my whole life." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I can feel it, Lyra. The darkness. It wants me to call the entire pack to war, to crush the rebellion with such brutality that no one would ever dare challenge me again, to make examples of the traditionalists who dared to question my authority, to hurt Caius for his insolence." The confession hung in the air between them, terrible and honest. "That's not you," she said firmly. "That's the curse talking, the poison that's been growing through your bloodline for generations." "And what if it is me?" he countered, turning to face her fully. "What if the curse just brings out what was always there, the monster beneath the crown?" "Then I'll see it," she told him, "and I'll heal it, if I can." Hope and despair warred in his expression. "You don't even know if you have the ability." "No." She took a step closer. "But I'm willing to try." She extended her hand, palm up, an invitation and a question. For a long moment he simply stared at it, the battle still raging behind his eyes. Then, slowly, as if it cost him enormous effort, he placed his hand in hers. The connection was immediate and overwhelming. The moment their skin touched, Lyra felt a surge of energy unlike anything she'd experienced before, a rush of sensation and emotion that stole her breath. It was as if a door had opened inside her, revealing abilities she'd always possessed but never accessed. She could feel him, not just his physical presence, but something deeper, the essence of who he was, the core of strength and stubborn honor at the center of his being, the loyalty and fierce protectiveness that drove him, the vision of a better world that had sustained him through 15 years of struggle, and surrounding it all, choking it, was the darkness. Ancient and malevolent, passed from father to son through countless generations, growing stronger with each transmission. She could see it like ink and water, spreading through his spirit, tainting the silver light that was his true nature. "I can see it," she whispered, awe and terror mingling in her voice. "I can feel the curse." His fingers tightened around hers. "Can you heal it?" "I don't know. It's so old. So deep." She met his gaze, the black and silver swirling in his eyes a reflection of the battle within. "But I have to try." Instinct guided her. She placed her free hand against his chest, directly over his heart, and closed her eyes. She reached beyond the physical, beyond flesh and bone, into the spiritual essence that made him who he was. The darkness recoiled at her touch, ancient and cunning, sensing a threat to its existence. It fought her, lashing out with visions of violence and power, offering her glimpses of what could be if she joined with it instead of fighting it. Lyra gritted her teeth, pushing past the temptation, focusing on the true Alaric beneath the corruption. "I see you," she whispered, though whether aloud or only in the spiritual plane, she couldn't tell. "I see your strength, your compassion, your vision for a better world." The darkness surged, wrapping around her like tendrils of smoke, trying to smother her connection. Pain lanced through her, the psychic backlash of powers she'd never used, fighting an enemy she barely understood. "Lyra!" Alaric's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Stop. It's hurting you." "No." She tightened her grip on his hand, her other palm pressing harder against his chest. "I won't let you become what you fear. I won't let the curse win." She pushed deeper, past the pain, past fear, into the very heart of the darkness. And there, at its core, she found not evil, but grief. Ancient, unprocessed grief, passed down through generations. The pain of alphas forced to rule alone, without the balance they needed, without the healing touch of those who could share their burden. The sorrow of power without connection, of strength without tenderness, of command without true understanding. It wasn't a curse at all. It was the natural consequence of imbalance, of a society that had divorced power from compassion, strength from healing, alpha from omega. "Oh," she breathed, the realization washing through her. It was never a curse. It was loss, the loss of what should have been, the loss of balance. Understanding was the key. The moment she recognized the true nature of the darkness, she knew how to heal it, not by fighting, not by forcing it out, but by transforming it, by acknowledging the grief, accepting the pain, and offering what had been missing for so long. Balance, connection, compassion without weakness, strength without cruelty. She opened herself fully, offering not just healing, but understanding, not just cleansing, but completion. The darkness resisted at first, then slowly, gradually, began to change. The ink-like corruption thinned, lightened, transformed from something malignant to something that could be integrated, accepted, made whole. Lyra felt the exact moment when balance was restored. A surge of energy coursed through both of them, powerful enough to make her gasp. She opened her eyes to find Alaric staring at her, his gaze clear and silver once more. The darkness gone not through destruction, but through transformation. "What did you do?" he whispered, wonder in his voice. "I didn't destroy it," she said, her own voice shaky with exhaustion and awe. "I balanced it. The darkness wasn't evil, Alaric. It was grief, the accumulated sorrow of alphas ruling without their natural counterparts, without omegas who could share the burden of leadership, without soul healers." Understanding dawned in his eyes. The separation of power from compassion. Yes. She swayed slightly, the energy of the healing having drained her more than she'd realized. "Your ancestors weren't cursed. They were incomplete, as you were, as I was." He caught her as her knees buckled, gathering her against his chest with a gentleness that belied his strength. "And now?" "Now we're balanced." She looked up at him, saw his true self clear and unburdened for the first time since they'd met. Alpha and Omega, strength and healing, as it was meant to be. He carried her to a chair, setting her down with careful concern, then knelt before her in an echo of that first morning outside her shelter. "I never thought it was possible," he said quietly, "to be free of the rage, the darkness, the constant battle for control." "It's not gone," she cautioned. "Just balanced, transformed. You'll still feel anger, still know violence when necessary, but it won't consume you, won't control you. Because of you," she shook her head. "Because of us, what we can be together." The depth of emotion in his silver eyes stole her breath. "And what is that, little healer? What can we be together?" 6 weeks ago, she might have retreated from the question, might have hidden behind duty or position, or the 1,000 reasons why an Omega shouldn't reach for an Alpha King. But she was no longer that frightened, isolated healer, hiding in her shelter at the edge of the borderlands. She was Lyra, soul healer, council member, the Omega who had faced darkness and transformed it into light. "Partners," she said simply. "Equals in different strengths, the balance that both of us have been missing all our lives." He took her hands in his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. "And if I wanted more than partnership, if I wanted the kind of balance that only comes from the deepest connection?" Her heart stuttered in her chest. "You mean—" "I mean a bond, Lyra, a true mating bond between Alpha and Omega." His voice was rough with emotion. "Not because of politics or symbolism or ancient legends, but because somewhere between that blizzard and this moment, I fell in love with the Omega who wasn't afraid of monsters, who saw value in broken things, who healed what I thought was beyond saving." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable, in a way she'd never imagined possible from an Alpha King. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll consider it." His silver eyes held hers, open and unguarded. "Say you'll give us the chance to discover what we could be together. Not as king and healer, not as Alpha and Omega, but as Alaric and Lyra." Maz, 6 weeks ago, she would have laughed at the idea that the Alpha King might offer her his heart along with his crown. But 6 weeks ago, she hadn't known her own strength, hadn't discovered the power that had always been inside her, waiting for the right moment to emerge. "Yes," she said, the word both terrifying and exhilarating. "Yes, I'll consider it." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night, brilliant and warm and full of promise. He rose, still holding her hands, pulling her gently to her feet. "Then we face what comes next together, the rebellion, the reform, the rebuilding of the alliance, all of it." "Together," she agreed, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. "As it was meant to be." He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and pressed his lips to her forehead in a gesture of tenderness that made her heart ache. "Rest now, little healer. Recover your strength. I need to meet with the inner pack, prepare our response to the Southern Rebellion." He hesitated. "After, when things are settled, after, we'll talk about the future," she promised. "Our future." He nodded, his silver eyes holding hers for one more moment, then turned and left the council chamber. Lyra sank back into her chair, exhaustion and wonder washing through her in equal measure. She had healed the Alpha King, had touched the darkness at the heart of his lineage and transformed it into something that could be integrated, accepted, made whole. And in doing so, she had found her true purpose, not as a symbol of reform, not as a political statement, but as a soul healer, the balance to the Alpha's strength, the compassion to his power. What they could build together would change not just the Northern Pack, but all 5 territories. A new kind of leadership, a new understanding of what it meant to be Alpha and Omega, strength and healing, 2 halves of the same whole. The ancient code had been right all along. Human-locked Omegas weren't broken. They were essential. The spiritual heart of wolf society, without which even the strongest alphas would eventually succumb to the darkness of unchecked power. She touched her forehead where Alaric's lips had pressed, feeling the promise in that gentle gesture. There would be challenges ahead. The rebellion wouldn't be easily quelled. The traditionalists wouldn't simply disappear. Caius and his Eastern Pack would continue to probe for weaknesses, waiting for any opportunity to destabilize the alliance. But for the first time since the blizzard had brought 25 dying wolves to her door, Lyra felt truly certain of her place in the world. She belonged here, in the Northern Keep, at Alaric's side, not behind him, not beneath him, but beside him, equal in different strengths, the balance he needed, the heart to his crown. Together, they would build something that had never existed before. A pack structure where power came from loyalty and competence, not just physical dominance, where Omegas had agency and Betas had voice, where everyone, regardless of how they were born, had a chance to matter, not just a reform or a revolution, but a restoration of what should have always been. The truth that had been hidden in the ancient code, the wisdom that alphas had tried to erase from history. That true strength came not from dominance alone, but from the balance of power and compassion, of Alpha and Omega, of soul and body, working in harmony. As she left the council chamber, wolves parted before her, their eyes filled with a new kind of respect, not fear, not the wary deference they showed to power, but something deeper, recognition perhaps, of what she truly was, of what she represented. The return of balance to a world that had been skewed for too long. 6 months passed like a dream and a lifetime. The Southern Rebellion was contained not through war, but through negotiation, with Alaric and Lyra traveling together to the disputed territories, showing by example the new balance they offered. Some packs rejoined the alliance immediately, seeing the wisdom in unity. Others remained independent but peaceful, waiting to see if the changes would endure. Caius and the Eastern Pack maintained their distance, watchful and wary, but unwilling to challenge the Northern Pack directly. The Eastern Alpha had seen something in Alaric's eyes during their last encounter, something that warned him that the game had changed, that the weaknesses he'd been counting on no longer existed. Within the Northern Keep, the transformation was profound. The council, reconstituted with wolves who believed in the reforms, functioned more efficiently than ever. The infirmary system Lyra had reorganized became a model for all 5 territories, with healing centers established throughout the northern lands. Most significant of all, other Omegas began to emerge from the shadows, some human-locked like Lyra, others able to shift but possessing healing gifts that went beyond the physical. They came to the Northern Keep seeking guidance, protection, purpose. Lyra established a training program, teaching them to access the abilities that had been suppressed for generations, to reclaim their rightful place as healers of body and soul. And through it all, her bond with Alaric deepened, strengthened, transformed from political alliance to genuine partnership to something more profound than either had dared hope for. They were formally mated at the winter solstice, beneath a sky brilliant with stars, surrounded by a pack that had come to see them as the embodiment of a new way forward. Not the end of tradition, but its fulfillment. The restoration of balance, long lost. On the anniversary of the blizzard that had brought them together, they stood on the balcony of the northern keep, looking out over the snow-covered valleys below. Alaric's arm was around her waist, a casual intimacy that still made her heart race after all these months. 1 year, he said softly. 1 year since you opened your door to dying wolves. 1 year since you dropped to your knee in the snow, she countered, smiling up at him. Who would have thought we'd end up here? His silver eyes, clear and bright without the shadow that had haunted them for so long, held hers with a depth of emotion that never failed to move her. I like to think some part of me knew, even then, that when I saw you standing in that doorway, exhausted and defiant and absolutely magnificent, some part of me recognized what you were, what we could be together. Soul healer and alpha king. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his warmth, offering balance in return. The compassion and the crown. Lyra and Alaric, he corrected gently, pressing a kiss to her temple. 2 broken wolves who found wholeness in each other. She thought about the long journey that had brought them here, about the girl who had been told she was worthless because she couldn't shift, about the alpha who had fought alone against the darkness in his blood, about how they had saved each other, healed each other, transformed each other into something stronger and more complete than either could have been alone. "What do you see when you look to the future?" she asked, watching the light fade from the western peaks as the sun set in a blaze of crimson and gold. He was quiet for a moment, his hand tracing idle patterns on her side. "I see change," he said finally. "Not just in the northern pack, but across all 5 territories. A return to the old wisdom, but with new understanding. A world where being born Omega or Beta or Alpha determines your gifts, not your worth. Where human-locked wolves are valued for the abilities they possess, not despised for the ones they lack." "A world of balance," she murmured. "Yes." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "And I see us at the center of it all. Not because we're perfect or all-powerful or destined by prophecy, but because we had the courage to be what others feared, to become what the world needed, even when it meant facing our deepest wounds." She thought about her shelter on the borderlands, the small, safe life she'd built there, how terrified she'd been to leave it behind, to step into the unknown, to risk everything on the promise of something more, and how that fear, justified as it had been, would have kept her from discovering her true strength, her true purpose, her true heart. "I love you," she said simply. "Not the Alpha King, not the reformer, not the legend. Just you, the wolf who saw something worth saving in a broken Omega, who knelt in the snow to thank her for her courage, who never stopped believing she was more than what the world told her she was." His smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "And I love you, little healer. Not the soul healer, not the symbol of reform, not the Omega who saved my pack. Just you, the woman who opened her door during a blizzard because she couldn't bear to let strangers die, who faced fear and prejudice and constant judgment without breaking, who reached into the darkness inside me and found light." He kissed her then, gentle at first, then with growing passion, a physical manifestation of the bond that connected them, Alpha and Omega, strength and healing, 2 halves of the same whole. When they finally parted, both breathless, the first stars were appearing in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. "Come," he said, taking her hand. "The pack is waiting. We have a long night ahead." Tonight was the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, marked in wolf tradition by the howl of renewal. In years past, it had been a ceremony reserved for alphas alone, a display of dominance and power. Alaric had changed that, opening the ritual to all wolves regardless of rank, transforming it from a hierarchy into a harmony. As they descended into the great courtyard where hundreds of wolves had gathered, Lyra felt the familiar surge of gratitude that had become her constant companion. Gratitude for the blizzard that had driven dying wolves to her door. For the Alpha King who had seen her value when no one else did. For the journey that had led her from isolation to connection, from brokenness to wholeness, from fear to love. The moon rose over the mountains, full and bright against the velvet darkness of the winter sky. Alaric raised his head and began the ancient call, his voice powerful and clear in the stillness. One by one, other wolves joined in, the sound building from a single voice to a chorus, to a symphony of belonging. Lyra lifted her face to the stars and added her voice to the howl. She couldn't shift, couldn't transform into the wolf shape that most of her kind wore as easily as breathing. But she had found her true form nonetheless. Soul healer, council member, Alpha's mate. The Omega who had opened her door during a blizzard and found her destiny waiting in the snow. As the howl echoed through the mountains, carrying their unity to the furthest reaches of the territory, she felt the bond that connected her to Alaric pulse with shared emotion. Not just love, though that was the foundation, but purpose, vision. The understanding that what they built together would outlast them both, would reshape the world for generations to come. A world of balance, of strength guided by compassion, of power tempered by healing. A world where no one would ever again be told they were broken simply because they were different. Where value came not from conformity to tradition, but from the courage to become what you were truly meant to be, even if no one had ever been that before. That was worth everything, worth leaving safety behind, worth facing prejudice and doubt and constant tests, worth opening the door during the blizzard, even knowing the danger, worth trusting that sometimes salvation wore the face of destruction, and the monster you saved became the one who helped you discover your own hidden strength. As the howl faded into silence, Alaric's hand found hers in the darkness, fingers interlacing, the simple touch communicating everything words couldn't capture. They had found each other across ice and fire, across prejudice and tradition, across the divisions that had separated Alpha from Omega for generations, had healed each other's deepest wounds, had transformed each other's greatest weaknesses into unexpected strengths, and in doing so, they had begun to heal the world.